you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheap again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the fourth part of What If Deku Learns Under the Batman. Smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Bruce Wayne sat at his desk in his large, spacious office of Wayne Tower back in Gotham City. He had just returned to Japan, the sports festival having ended 3 days ago. The students at UA were given a week off to recuperate from the sports festival. Bruce hadn't heard from Izuku since his surgery. All attempts to contact Izuku were ignored. The boy was avoiding him. After the festival, Bruce had to return to Gotham for his work. But Alfred had requested to remain behind to watch over Izuku in his recovery. He had taken his loss to the young Todoroki very hard, and it was taking its toll on him. He spent most of his time in the warehouse, training to near exhaustion. His mother had said that he was sneaking out at night, sometimes not returning home until almost morning. She was worried. Alfred was worried. Bruce was worried. Midoriya was at war, both internally and externally. He had followed his instincts during the match and goaded his opponent into using his full power, in the end costing him the match. This reality clashed constantly with another, kinder reality, that he had tried to help his friend in need at his own expense. But both were overshadowed by the harshest reality of all. Even at his best, he couldn't beat Todoroki at full strength. Not without a quirk. Bruce knew that despite his rapid progression, Midoriya would eventually hit a wall. But the boy was resilient and strong, and had accomplished so much. He didn't expect him to take it so hard. Bruce's thought was interrupted as his watch began to beep. He was receiving a call from Alfred. "Sorry to disturb you, sir," said Alfred, after picking up. "But I need you back here urgently. It's about Master Midoriya." "What happened?" asked Bruce, alarmed. He had come for another one of his training sessions at the warehouse, but slipped away when my back was turned, said Alfred. "He's free to come and go as he pleases, Alfred," said Bruce. "Yes, sir, but there's more to it than that," said Alfred, a slight nervous look breaking across his usually placid face. "He has taken one of the cars." "What?" said Bruce. What was the boy thinking? He wasn't old enough to drive. If he got caught, the fallout could cost him his spot at UA. Worse yet, he or someone else could get hurt. "I'll have the watchtower send me there." "What car is it?" Alfred's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "The car, sir." The realization of his words passed over Bruce like a cold shadow. "Shit, we've been at this for an hour," said Izuku. "My patience is running out." He stood in the middle of a small office, overlooking what used to be a factory used by the cartel to ship drugs. Tables and workstations were tipped over, both cartel guards and workers beaten senseless. All the heavy machinery was broken, sparking and smoldering from the explosive blasts used by the intruder. Izuku had walked through them all, one by one, making his way to the drug lord's office. He was there for answers, and he was going to get them one way or another. "You're dead, you hear me?" shouted the drug lord. "You think you can just come in here and smash up the place? Don't you know who?" His words replaced with a loud scream as Izuku used his explosive gauntlets on his exposed arm, which began to blister and bleed. "Those are third-degree burns," said Midoriya, his voice deep and distorted from the mask he wore. "Any more damage sustained and you'll be needing skin grafts." He leaned in closer as the drug lord stopped screaming. "I'll ask you again, where is the sludge villain?" "I don't know," shouted the drug lord. "I never ran with the guy." "Liar," shouted Izuku, blasting his arm again. The shrieks rang throughout the warehouse. "He was here 6 months ago as your enforcer. You know where he is, and you're going to tell me, or I'm going to work on the other arm." "Stop," shouted the drug lord. "We fell out after he stole from me. He took over 3 million yen's worth of dope and took off. I haven't seen him since." "Not good enough," shouted Midoriya, lifting his hand and blasting the wall behind him. "Where is he?" But the drug lord didn't answer. He stared behind Izuku, a look of sheer terror on his face. Izuku saw a large shadow drape over them, a heavy hand placed on his shoulder. He dropped the drug lord and kicked him hard in the face, knocking him out. "What are you doing here?" said Izuku without turning. "Joyriding is a crime," said Batman, unamused. "What were you thinking? The Batmobile is not a toy." "I'm doing hero work," said Izuku, finally looking his mentor in the face. "You don't have a license for hero work," said Batman. "Neither do you. Or to drive for that matter," Batman retorted. "Your anger is out of control." You said my anger is what made me strong, said Izuku. Not like this, shouted Batman, gesturing to the destruction around them. You're lashing out like a wounded animal. Spare me, Batman, said Izuku. I've seen you in action. This is no worse than what you've done. You're not me, said Batman. And I'm not training you so you can become like me either. Then why are you training me, then? Shouted Izuku angrily. It's been over a year. I completed the training. I got into UA, I did what I set out to do. But Kaken's killer is still out there. Even if we knew where he was, you're not ready to face him, said Batman flatly. How can you say that? Said Izuku incredulously. Everything I've done, everything I've worked for, is for the sole purpose of bringing that bastard down. After what he's done, he doesn't deserve to be free. He doesn't deserve to live. Killing him won't make it any better, said Batman. Are you kidding me? Said Izuku. It's all I think about. Every single day. I can't rest. No, I won't rest until he's destroyed. It's exactly what you promised me. I promised you justice, said Batman. Not revenge. They're the same thing. No, they're not, said Batman angrily. And until you learn that, then you can never truly be a hero. Shut up, Izuku screamed, punching the wall beside him. His gauntlet exploded as it hit the wall, causing the brick around it to crack and crumble. He stood there with his fist extended for 10 seconds. I failed, said Izuku. I wasn't strong enough to beat the villains at the USJ. I couldn't beat Todoroki, and I couldn't save Kaken. Failure is inevitable, said Batman. Even for heroes. Not for you, said Izuku. I know the stories. You've beaten literal gods and monsters. You've overcome impossible odds and even stared death itself in the face. There's nothing you can't do. Batman sighed deeply. Wrong again, he said, walking towards the exit. Get in the Batmobile. We're going back to the warehouse. That's an order, he added before Izuku could protest. Izuku knew he messed up. He and Bruce sat in silence the whole ride back to the warehouse. The adrenaline from his escapade had worn off, and the reality of what he had done was sinking in. All he could do was sit in shame and wonder if this would be the end of his training with Bruce. Alfred had given him quite a scolding. You had this old man worried sick, Master Midoriya, he said crossly. And you have worried your poor mother to death as well. What do you have to say for yourself? No, forget it, he added before Izuku could speak. I'm sure Master Bruce has ample punishment for you. Bruce said nothing, walking past Alfred towards the bat computer. He took out a small disc and placed it in the computer, and a video pulled up on the screen of a young, handsome man sitting in a chair. Master Bruce, no, said Alfred, horrified. You can't be serious. It's time he learned, said Bruce. And he has a right to know. The camera in the video zoomed in close, showing scars and cuts lining his handsome face. A large red brand in the shape of a J was engraved into his cheek. His left eye was nearly swollen shut, and his open one simply stared off into space. The sight horrified Izuku, but he continued to watch. Have you got something to tell the nice man, Jason? A voice off camera said. It was high, taunting and sing-songy in nature, and it chilled Izuku to the bone. My name is Jason Todd, the man said blankly. Who do you hate? Said the voice. Batman, Jason replied. Excellent, said the voice. The camera zoomed out. Jason was strapped to a chair, but he wasn't resisting against his restraints. He wore a torn red and green jumpsuit with a golden utility belt and arm bracers. A small golden R was embossed on the left breast of his uniform. Izuku could hardly believe his eyes. He was staring at Robin. Of course you do, the voice continued. A tall, lanky man stepped in front of the camera. He wore a purple pinstripe suit with a green vest and tie that matched his greasy green hair. His face was ghostly pale, with bright green eyes glowing from within their darkened, shallow sockets. His lips curled into a blood-red smile that stretched upward past his cheeks. Izuku felt his blood run cold. The Joker. Did you get that, Bats? Said the Joker. Kid's not yours anymore. He's mine. Mine, mine, mine. To do with as I wish. He turned back to Jason. Hey, I never asked. What's the big secret? Who is the big, bad bat? His name. Tell me. Of course, sir, said Jason. It's bang. Izuku gasped in shock. In a flash, the Joker had pulled a gun from his suit coat and shot Jason point blank, who fell out of the chair and to the ground in a crumpled heap. The Joker walked towards the camera and picked it up, showing the bleeding and lifeless corpse of Jason Todd. Never could stand a tattletale, said the Joker. That's why I like to work alone. No one to spoil the punchline. Joker came back into view of the camera, but kept Jason in the shot. You should try it sometime. After all, you see what happens when you drag your friends into this crazy little game of ours. The screen went blank. The video had ended, leaving Izuku at a loss for words. He had always seen the news reports, heard the stories of the Joker's villainy, but to see it up close such as this was unimaginable. Failure is inevitable, Bruce said again, walking away. Izuku was silent as Alfred poured him a cup of tea. He was still in shock over what he had just witnessed. "I'm sorry, Alfred," he said. "I'm sorry for how I've been acting." "I'm sorry too, Master Midoriya," said Alfred. "And I'm sorry you had to see that awful video. Master Bruce plays it quite often for himself ever since it happened." "When did it?" 3 years ago, Alfred replied. "Not a day goes by I don't miss young Master Todd." "What was he like?" Izuku asked. "In many ways, like you," said Alfred. "Brash, headstrong, and gifted." Izuku fell silent, drinking his tea. "Why?" asked Izuku after a minute. "Pardon?" asked Alfred. "Why does he keep it?" said Izuku. "The video. If it's his greatest failure, why does he keep reliving it?" Alfred leaned back in his chair. The Joker had escaped Arkham Asylum with the assistance of one of the Batman's oldest adversaries, Ra's al Ghul, head of the League of Shadows. "The League of Shadows?" asked Izuku. "A terrorist organization that dates back millennia," Alfred explained. "A group who claims to desire peace, but at the expense of murder and genocide. Ra's al Ghul has tried unsuccessfully to pass his legacy down to Master Bruce, to inherit his throne as the leader of the League." "I didn't know," said Izuku. "You wouldn't," said Alfred. "They are living ghosts. They went completely dark after the incident. When they released the Joker, he was intended to be used as a distraction for Master Bruce and Jason while he carried out plans of his own. They were separated, and Master Todd disappeared, along with the Joker. Master Bruce spent over a year trying to find. When he received the tape, he redoubled his efforts into finding the Joker. And when he did finally find him," Alfred paused. "I was afraid that Master Bruce would finally have broken his one rule." "Which is?" asked Izuku. "To never take a human life," said Alfred. "But I dare say that man is the farthest thing from human as one could possibly get," he added bitterly. "Why didn't he?" Izuku asked. "Of all people, the Joker deserves to die. After everything he's done, why hasn't he killed him?" "Because it wouldn't have brought Jason back," said a voice behind them. It was Bruce. He had been listening into the conversation, and it would have been exactly what the Joker wanted. "What do you mean?" asked Izuku. "If you had the chance to kill the Joker, or to kill the man who murdered your parents, you wouldn't take it." "No," said Bruce, "because monsters like Joe Chill, like the Joker, don't die. They're born again and again, every minute. With one death comes another, and then another. In the end, the amount of killers that remains in the world hasn't diminished at all, and you find you've gone down a path of death and destruction, leaving bodies in your wake. If you let yourself go down that path, a path of death and destruction, it's one that you can never come back from. I keep that tape as a reminder of those I let down, and everything I have to live up to." "This creature killed Kaken," Bruce said Izuku. "I don't know if I can let him live after that." "When the time comes, I hope you can," said Bruce. "Not for his sake, for yours." The hero killer Stain glanced around at his surroundings. His mysterious visitor had taken him to a darkened tavern. It was dank and completely empty, save a sole figure sitting on a stool, leaning against the bar. He was clad all in black, contrasting directly with his messy silver hair. A large disembodied hand was clasped on his face as some sort of macabre mask. Stain disliked him on the spot. Behind the hand man was a small television that had sound only pasted across the screen. The warping man had taken his place behind the bar counter. It didn't take long for Stain to realize where he really was. "Now I get it," said Stain. "You must be the ones who attacked UA, and you want to recruit me to build up your little group again." "Yeah," the hand villain said simply. "It'll be great, you've got so much experience." "And what's your mission?" asked Stain. "For now," the hand villain replied, "I just want to kill All Might. I like to destroy anything that pisses me off." He held up a picture of a young boy with messy green hair wearing a UA gym uniform. "Like this little brat here." "Game over." Stain felt the anger boiling deep inside of him. "I was a fool to think you could offer me anything," he growled. "It turns out, you're the type of person I hate most in this world." He quickly drew 2 large combat knives from his side. "The goals of your league are those of a child. What meaning is there to killing if you don't have real convictions?" Kurogiri, the warp villain, sighed inwardly. Tamura Shigaraki cares only about wanton violence, so they brought the hero killer in to guide him. Perhaps they made a mistake. "Master, should I step in?" he asked in the direction of the television set. "Let it happen," said the voice from the television. "It's possible this is the only way he'll learn anything. He needs to think about the ways he must grow, how he can mature. Only then can he reach his potential." Izuku and his classmates returned to school with great fanfare. He was accosted on the train on his way to work several times from people who had watched him in the sports festival. They were impressed by his abilities and strength, asking if he was really trained by Batman as rumored, and even asking for autographs. He found it all very overwhelming, and was quick to blend into the crowd once the train had reached his stop. Upon reaching his class, his classmates were all abuzz with stories of their own celebrity. Their performance in the sports festival had placed them on the map with fiery beacons to light the way. A moment later, the door to the class opened, and an unbandaged Aizawa sauntered in with a simple morning class. "Mr. Aizawa, you don't need your bandages anymore," said Asui. "That's good news." The old lady went a little overboard in her treatment, said Aizawa, scratching his cheek absently. "Anyway, we have an important class today on hero informatics." The class shifted uneasily in their seats, looking at each other nervously. Hero informatics sounded hard, perhaps something to do with hero laws or protocol. Aizawa cleared his throat. "You need codenames." The students around Izuku cheered. Aizawa activated his quirk and growled, and they fell silent. "This is related to the first-year draft pick I mentioned before the festival," he said. "Normally, students don't have to worry about the draft yet until their second or third year, but this class is different. By extending offers to you, pros are essentially investing in your potential. Be warned, many offers can be rescinded if their interest in you dies down before graduation." "So you're saying that we'll still have to prove ourselves even after we've been recruited?" asked Hagakure. "Stupid selfish adults," said Minda sourly. Aizawa cleared his throat again and clicked a presentation remote towards the smartboard behind him. "Here are the totals for those who got offers." A list of the students' names sprang to life, each with a different size bar graph and number attached to it. As expected, Todoroki had the most offers, along with Takoyami and Ida close behind him. There was a significant gap between them and the rest of the students, but many were still excited about the prospect of pros wanting to work with them. "Congratulations, Todoroki," said Yaoyorozu. "You must be proud. These offers are most likely because of my father," Todoroki said plainly. "I thought you would have gotten more, Midoriya," said Kaminar. "Probably because of how much he hurt himself in the final round," said Maita. Izuku scanned the board and saw that he was near the bottom. Like his classmates said, he hadn't received very many offers, but he had expected that. Despite taking second place in the festival, as he was still quirkless, he represented an upstart to the status quo. He assumed that many pros simply viewed him as a liability and didn't want to take him on. "Despite these results, you'll all be interning with pros, got it?" said Aizawa. "Even those who didn't get any offers. You've already had your first taste of combat when the villains attacked the USJ, but it will still be beneficial to see pros at work, up close and personal in the field. That's why you need hero names. These names will likely be temporary, but take them seriously." As if on cue, the door opened and Midnight waltzed in and up to the front of the class. "He's right, you know," said Midnight. "The codenames you choose could be your codenames for life, so you better be careful. Midnight is going to have final approval over your names," said Aizawa. "It's not my forte. The name you give yourself is important. It helps reinforce your image and shows what kind of hero you want to be in the future. A codename tells people exactly what you represent." Izuku looked at the marker board that was just handed to him. He had considered what he wanted to do about his codename, but hadn't come up with anything solid. He had considered choosing something to honor his mentor. More than once Bruce was going to give him the mantle of Robin, but Bruce had specifically avoided that conversation, and after seeing the Joker's video, he could understand why. Bruce had also told him the importance of becoming his own hero. "I can't tell you what path to take," he had said to him. "I can only prepare you to make the choice when you get there." He and Kaken used to dream of their hero names when they were little, and now he was living that dream. One that was denied of his friend because of his weakness. One by one his classmates presented their names. Before he knew it, it was now Izuku's turn. Slowly, he approached the front of the class, everyone waiting eagerly to see what awesome name the protege of Batman had to present them. "What you choose, Midoriya," said Kirishima excitedly. "Something like Batkid or Batwing, right?" Izuku took a deep breath and showed them his chosen name. "Deku." The class stared at him in confusion. "Are you sure about that, Midoriya?" asked Kaminari. "Yeah, man, remember, that could be your hero name forever," said Kirishima. "I know," said Izuku. "But why?" asked Midnight. "Don't you want something a little more akin to your mentor, the Dark Knight?" "No," said Izuku. "It has to be this. This name was given to me by someone who never got the chance to be here because of me." Izuku fell silent, trembling slightly. Everyone glanced at each other uncomfortably. The fun had gone from this exercise. "I like it," said a voice from the back. Everyone turned back towards the source of the voice, Uraraka. "Really?" asked Maita, who would want the hero name useless. "Sure, if you take it at face value," said Uraraka. "But when you think about it, I think it fits him. Everyone here has underestimated Deku in one way or another, and each time he shows us more and more that he's the most capable person here. Everyone expects him to be useless because he doesn't have a quirk, but then he takes them down. Besides, she added, it reminds me of the phrase dekamasu, or you can do it. And we all know that Deku can do anything he sets his mind to. The atmosphere of the class changed. Everyone smiled and looked at each other in approval. Izuku was speechless, feeling a swelling in his heart. For so many years he bore that name as a reminder for his failure in life, both as a quirkless boy desperately dreaming for a life he couldn't achieve, and for his part in Kaken's death. But now his friend had given it a new meaning for him, something that gave him hope. He turned his head away as he sat down at his desk, trying to hide the tears welling in his eyes. Lastly, the stage fell upon Ida. He had been trembling so hard he could barely hold the pen in his hand. Dread and nausea built up inside him as he tried to write his chosen hero name. But the truth was, it wasn't one that he had chosen, nor was it one he wanted to bear under the circumstances. He had gone to see his brother in Hosu General Hospital the day of his attack. The hero killer stain had left him for dead, and he almost didn't survive the surgery. They had stabilized him, and he was on his way to recovery, but Tensei had revealed something to Tenya that shook him to his core. I can't feel my legs, Tensei had said. I wasn't sure if I wanted to say anything yesterday, but they're useless. What? Tenya gasped. No, I think the hero ingenium is finished, said Tensei. At least for me. What are you saying? Said Ida. Don't talk like that. You still have so many people to help and inspire, brother. I'm sorry, said Tensei. I'm afraid it is. That's why I want you to take the name. When Ida returned to school after their break, he tried to play off that everything was fine, and that there was nothing to worry about. He was the class president, and he couldn't allow himself to display weakness in front of his classmates. He had to be strong, for them, his brother, and himself. As he sat at his desk, he tried to force himself to write the name ingenium on his whiteboard, to honor his fallen brother and carry on the family legacy. But he just couldn't. He wasn't ready. He approached the classroom and showed his chosen name to his class. Tenya, he said unceremoniously. You're using your real name, too, said Midnight. The class glanced around at each other, confused. Izuku looked at Uraraka, who shared his concern. They had been worried about their friend ever since they learned of Ingenium's defeat at the hands of a villain. Izuku had seen through his facade of calm and peace at once. Beneath his friend's eyes lay a look that Izuku recognized in himself, a maelstrom of sorrow, pain, confusion, and an intense desire for revenge. This was uncharacteristic of the Ida they came to know and love, the by-the-book class president, the one who always chose the right, taking the high road, and put the safety and care of others before himself. Now, those traits seemed to be buried in a deep chasm of grief that he couldn't escape. It was a pain that Izuku lived in every day, and one he wanted to spare his friend from, somehow. Aizawa told the class they were to hand in their picks by the weekend, and class was dismissed. The students all chattered about what agencies they wanted to go with. Uraraka had excitedly told Izuku that their fight in the sports festival had inspired her to learn more hand-to-hand combat, so she had chosen the Gunhead Agency. Izuku was looking through the list of his own. There were a few smaller-time agencies that had extended offers to him, but there weren't any that caught his immediate attention or interest. He wasn't sure how he was going to make his choice. He took a picture of the list and sent it to Bruce, hoping he could narrow down the choice for him. He didn't see any offers from Bruce for internship, but that didn't surprise him. Bruce preferred to work alone, and didn't align himself with any agencies, even though he is a founding member of the Justice League and provided a significant portion of their funding. His title is really only that of ceremony, as his status was technically that of part-time and he usually only worked with them out of necessity. Izuku's phone pinged, indicating a message. Bruce had answered his query, but his answer confused Izuku. Titan's Hero Agency. Titan's Agency, thought Izuku, as in the Teen Titans. Izuku's confusion grew. They were an American agency, and he didn't even think they had a Japan division. They weren't on his list of offers, or even on any of the lists provided by the UA staff. What was he planning? He asked Bruce for more information, but his only reply was that he would be collected the day his internship starts. He supposed he didn't have any recourse but to wait. Ida was walking towards the entrance of the school at a brisk pace. Izuku hadn't noticed that he was gone, and he and Uraraka had to run to catch up to him. Ida, wait, Izuku shouted. Ida stopped, but didn't turn. Now that they had caught up to him, Izuku was at a loss for words as to what to say. Ida, I don't know what you're going through, he said. But you're not alone. If you ever want to talk, you can let us know. We're friends, right? Ida turned to face them. Yes, he said with a small smile. Perhaps he was trying to dispel their fears about him. But to Izuku, his unearthly smile worried him further. Without another word, Ida turned and began his journey home. But Izuku stopped him. He took out a small disc-like device from his utility belt and handed it to Ida. This is a personal communicator. It connects to a secure virtual network from anywhere in the world. Just in case you need it, okay, he said. Ida took it and placed it in his pocket, bowed, and left for home. Izuku looked at Uraraka, who looked just as worried. Izuku wanted to do more for him. He wanted to be there for him as a friend should, but he didn't think anything they would say would get through to him. The truth was, the communicator worked both ways. He had a chance to glance at Ida's paper, and the only agency that he had chosen was one in Hosu City where his brother had fallen. He had given the communicator to him as it also served as a tracking beacon. He desperately hoped, however, that his fears were unfounded and that he wouldn't need it. The day of his internship came quickly. Izuku was packing his things, his hero suit prepped and ready to go. He still had little understanding of where he was going or what he would be doing, but he couldn't suppress his excitement. Bruce had made some modifications to his suit since the attack at the USJ. The weave and the plating had been upgraded, and now allowed for greater durability without sacrificing his speed. And he had added an experimental exoskeleton that increased Izuku's strength by 25%. The capacity of his utility belt had been expanded, allowing him to carry more tools and weapons. Lastly, his explosive gauntlets, prototyped by Meihatsume, had undergone rigorous repair and improvements and now functioned better than ever. Izuku knew he probably wasn't going to see any combat during this time, but he couldn't wait to take it all for a test run. Izuku was finishing up his packing when the doorbell rang. It had to be Alfred. He was probably going to take him to the Titan agency, wherever that was. He rushed to the door and opened it eagerly, but was surprised to see that it wasn't Alfred at all. Instead, it was a tall, handsome man with long black hair that dropped to his shoulders. He wore a simple blazer and button-up shirt, which did little to hide his impressive build. Izuku recognized him at once. It was the American who accompanied Bruce at the sports festival. "Hey there," he said cheerfully. "You must be izukumidoriya. The name's Dick Grayson. It's good to finally meet you. The hero killer. You want me to be a part of your crumbling little league," said the hero killer Stain. "But you won't accomplish anything if you don't have conviction and desire." Stain was standing over Shigaraki, his dagger buried deeply into the villain's shoulder. The pain didn't even seem to faze Shigaraki, who simply stared back at him with quiet contempt. "You're being a little rough, aren't you?" Shigaraki said. "Kurogiri, take this guy back." The warp villain didn't move. Blood was dripping down his arm from a deep gash left by the hero killer. "I'm sorry, I can't move," said Kurogiri. "It must be the hero killer's quirk at work." Stain spat on the ground. "The word hero has lost all meaning in this society," he said. "The world is overrun with fakes and criminals like you who chase petty dreams. They must all be purged." He moved his second dagger closer to Shigaraki's neck, but the villain grabbed the blade with his bare hand. Before his eyes, Stain's blade began to disintegrate into dust. Stain leaped backward in alarm, still clutching his damaged dagger. "You sure talk a lot, hero killer," said Shigaraki. "Conviction? Maybe I don't have anything as loaded as that. If I had to choose a desire, though, it'd be killing All Might. This world wants to worship trash like him. I'll destroy their beloved symbol of peace and crush them while they're in shock." Stain paused. "I see your true nature," he said finally. "It seems our goals fundamentally oppose each other. However, this wasn't in vain. We agree that we need to destroy the present." "I thought I was the person who hated most," said Shigaraki. "I was testing your motives," said Stain, sheathing his remaining dagger. "People always reveal their true colors on the verge of death. It's abnormal, but there is a desire, a warped sprout of conviction, inside of you. How will it bloom, I wonder? Maybe I'll let you grow, and if you don't turn out well, I'll take care of you later." Shigaraki rolled his eyes. "Kurogiri," he said, looking behind him as the warp villain began to move again. "A man as crazy as this would be nothing but trouble for the League of Villains." "Please reconsider," said Kurogiri. "This man will be a great asset if he joins us." "I'd say this was a success," said Stain. "My business here is done. Now, you will return me to Hosu." He licked his lips quickly, his eyes shining with a red glare. "There are many more false heroes I must attend to there." Izuku stood waiting on a bench at the train station near his house. Dick had gone off to get their tickets, as they would be traveling outside of the city. He still couldn't believe that he was working with Nightwing, Bruce's first protege, the first Robin. He hadn't had the chance to meet him previously, as his base of operations was in Bloodhaven, back in the USA. Bruce was very sparing about bringing up the past, and so he hadn't mentioned him often. But Nightwing was one of the largest advocates for quirkless heroes, being quirkless himself, and Izuku had followed his activities from a young age, since he formed the Teen Titans. After he struck out on his own as Nightwing, his time in the spotlight had declined. Dick had explained that this was due to the nature of crime in Bloodhaven, as it was considered to be one of the worst cities in the United States, and in many ways was worse than Gotham City. Many of the things that went on there were better off staying in the shadows where they belonged. "This place is great," said Nightwing, approaching Izuku. He was carrying their tickets, but also 2 drink cans. "You can purchase beer from the vending machines." "Can't do that back home. Aren't we on duty?" asked Izuku. He had Izuku gear up before they left, as they would be heading out on patrol as soon as they reached their destination. "You sound like Bruce," Nightwing said, laughing. He handed Izuku one of the cans. "I got you a melon soda. We got a ways to go, so we might as well be comfortable." "Where are we going?" said Izuku. "Hosu City," said Nightwing. "The Justice League wanted someone to investigate the hero killings, and Bruce volunteered me for the job. He said it was a good chance for you to get your feet wet, and told me to bring you along." "We're going after the hero killer," said Izuku, surprised. "No," said Nightwing. "We're only going to assist with the investigation. We'll be meeting up with the Endeavor and Manual Hero agencies when we get there, as well as several other ones. Until this killer is caught, it's all hands on deck." "You mentioned the Justice League," said Izuku as they approached their train. "I thought I was interning with the Teen Titans." "You are," said Nightwing. "Technically, you're interning with both. The Titans are an extension of the Justice League, and though I'm not a teen anymore, I'm still the de facto leader of the Titans, and serve as an advisory role with new recruits. Several other former Titans also serve as advisors, like Beast Boy and Raven. Since you're still a young blood, you're officially an intern of the Titans, and one day you'll take your place as a member of the Justice League, if that's where you would like to go with your career." Izuku's eyes widened. The idea of becoming a member of the Justice League filled him with a wonder and excitement he hadn't felt since All Might. All Might. Izuku's heart sank to his stomach. He still thought often about their last meeting. He was so angry and upset that he had lost complete control of the situation. He didn't want to hear what All Might had to say to him, and he refused to take the second-place medal from him. For all he knew, All Might still had it. "I don't know if you saw, but I was with Bruce and Alfred during the sports festival," said Nightwing, as if reading his mind. "I gotta say, that was one badass performance." Izuku flushed. He wasn't quite used to the candor displayed by Nightwing. It was different from Bruce's. It was much less reserved and much more flamboyant. Bruce was a man of little words, no matter how direct they were, but with Nightwing there seemed to be nothing he wouldn't say. It wasn't off-putting, but it was overwhelming. "I wasn't that impressive," was all he managed to say. "I gotta say though, it was rather reckless for a sporting event," said Nightwing. He wasn't chastising Izuku, just stating a fact. "Bruce was worried sick about you." "Bruce was worried about me," said Izuku, surprised. Bruce was still his reserved and silent self when he had awoken in Recovery Girls' hospital ward. He was chiefly worried that he had disappointed his mentor, and didn't consider that he was genuinely worried about him. "Yeah," said Nightwing. "He may not be good at showing it, but Bruce cares very deeply. He leaped from the bleachers and carried you off to meet with Recovery Girl before any of us could react." The look on his face was one I haven't seen since. He trailed off, going silent suddenly. He paused for a moment before clearing his throat. Regardless, it was an impossible situation. Had it been a real battle, the best option would have been to retreat. "I wasn't about to give up," said Izuku, slightly indignant. "Tactical retreats are not the same as giving up," said Nightwing. "Sometimes, you are faced with situations where there is no escape, and fighting your way out is the only viable solution. But you need to learn to gauge those situations carefully, so you can best avoid them. If you give up your tactical advantage, you'll find yourself in an impossible situation that could have been avoided. Even if it means making a retreat, you can regroup and attack the situation again." Izuku never thought of it that way. "But what about when you can't escape?" asked Izuku. "Fight till your last breath," said Nightwing. "But do so wisely, or it may very well be your last breath." He looked as if he spoke from experience, but Izuku didn't press the matter. They sat in silence for a while, and Izuku found his mind wandering on Ida. He had taken his internship with the Manual Hero Agency in Hosu, so he imagined they would be meeting up when he got there. This eased his mind a little, as he was getting increasingly worried about Ada's sudden change in personality, and the fact he went to Hosu specifically to intern was too much of a coincidence, and Izuku didn't believe in coincidence to begin with. An hour passed, and they began to approach Hosu City when the side of the bullet train, directly in front of them, exploded. Someone was thrown through the side of the train with incredible speed and force, as they were going over 200 miles per hour. A moment later, something began to bend back the broken metal of the train. Even though it was smaller and a different color, Izuku recognized the lifeless eyes set inside the giant exposed brain immediately. "Namu, stay back, kid," said Nightwing, springing into action immediately. He drew 2 retractable batons from his utility belt, launching him forward towards the Namu. His batons crackled and exploded with electricity upon making contact with the Namu, and they both flew out of the train and hurtling towards the ground below. "Nightwing," Izuku cried, but in a matter of seconds the train had already traveled out of range of Nightwing and his quarry. Izuku acted instinctively, leaping out of the bullet train, drawing his grapple gun from his utility belt, and propelled himself towards his friend's location. He only hoped he would be okay. Tenya Ida continued his patrol with Manuel, the normal hero. They had been patrolling most of the evening, and although he knew it was foolish to get his hopes up, Ida desperately wanted to find the hero killer. Manuel had already figured out the reason that he came to his agency in Hosu, and had warned him against the idea of pursuing him out of thoughts of revenge, not only for moral and ethical reasons, but for the legality of it as well. Heroes don't have the jurisdiction or authority to make arrests, or to use their quirks any way they want. They are mostly incident response, rescue, evacuation, and suppression of villain incidents. They can only assist with criminal investigations when invited by the police, and even then they were kept on a short leash. Strictly speaking, they couldn't just do what they wanted. Normally, Tenya would agree with him. He had always honored the hero code to the letter, trying to shape himself into a hero worthy of the Ida name. But the burning hatred in his heart would not falter. No adherence to rules, regulations, or ideals would quench it. He had made up his mind. He had to find his brother's attacker. He had to take him down. He was going to kill the hero killer. Manuel stopped suddenly. Several people before them began to panic. They could hear large explosions off in the distance, followed by screams. Manuel put a finger to his earpiece inside his helmet. "What's going on?" he said to the radio. "Villain attack. Don't worry. I'm heading that way right now." He turned to Tenya. "Stay with me. We're running." Tenya's mind was running a mile a minute. This couldn't be the hero killer. The attack was too flashy. It had to be someone else. Tenya froze mid-stride. He had almost missed it, but he caught a glimpse of light reflecting off something metal, something shiny. Looking down the alleyway, he was able to see it clearly. A sword. Tenya made a mad dash towards the alleyway. He found the hero killer. The hero killer looked in disdain in the direction of the chaos caused by the Namu. The idiot Shigaraki had made his move, but was being so noisy about it. He would have to dispose of him later. He turned back to the false hero he had pinned against the wall. They called him Native, but that mattered little to Stain. He would soon be dead. "My body, I can't move," said Native angrily, his voice muffled from Stain's hand covering his mouth. "You bastard, I'll kill you." Stain scowled, raising his blade. "If you call yourself a hero, you should choose your last words with care." Something came hurtling towards him at intense speed. Stain barely had enough time to raise his sword in defense, which connected with his attacker. It was a heavily armored hero, and his sword had knocked his helmet off his head, causing the hero to come crashing down to the floor. Stain realized that his attacker was only a child, no older than 15, wearing the suit. "Who are you?" he said as the boy hoisted himself from the ground. "Run away from here. This is not a place for children." "You're carrying blades all over your body," said the boy. "And you're wearing a blood-red scarf. You must be the hero killer, Stain. I have been looking for you, but I didn't think I would find you so soon." "I am." Stain raised his sword, stopping inches from the boy's face. "Your eyes are searing with vengeance," he said. "Be careful what you say next. If need be, even someone your age can be my target." The boy grew angrier. "Are you saying I'm not even a threat to you?" he snarled. "You listen to me, criminal. I am the brother of an incredible hero who you attacked. I have come to stop you because he can't anymore. You are going to remember my name for as long as you live. I am Ingenium, and I will defeat you. That I promise." "Then, so be it," said Stain. "Die." Izuku ran throughout the streets, desperately trying to find Nightwing. His mind was racing. The creature looked like Namu, but it was smaller and looked different. If it had the power that the Namu had back at the USJ, it could be really bad news. Not just for Nightwing, but for the whole city. He had to think. He was faced with another impossible situation. Just as Nightwing said, but he couldn't just stay back and do nothing. "Tenya." Izuku stopped. Someone was yelling a familiar name. Following the voice, he was shocked to see the streets besieged with not just one, but two Namu-like creatures facing off against several heroes. Each one of them was different. One was flying with leathery wings attached to its back, carrying civilians in its large clutches. The other was large, muscular and colored like the Namu at the USJ, but lacked the bird-like beak, and had no eyes of its own. Fire blazed around them as they continued their onslaught. What are these things? Thought Izuku. Izuku saw Manuel, the normal hero, using his quirk to control the water from a broken fire hydrant to douse the fire around them. Why did you have to run off on your own? He said angrily. Where the hell are you, Tenya? Izuku's stomach dropped to his feet. Ida had gone off on his own. This was grossly uncharacteristic of him, and very, very bad. Izuku pulled the control panel on his gauntlet computer, checking the homing beacon he placed on Ida's armor. He was several clicks away, hidden in an alleyway. He wasn't moving. Izuku calibrated his cowl vision to zero in on his location. He saw 3 faint outlines off in the distance. One of them was brandishing a long object, difficult to make out in the distance. It was sword. Shit. Izuku launched his grapple gun heading in the direction of the 3 figures. He only hoped he wasn't too late. Tamura Shigaraki cackled with glee as the Namu continued their wanton destruction. He and Kurogiri watched from a water tower in the distance, safe from the damage, but perfect for a bird's eye view. The Namu make such excellent playthings, Shigaraki said happily. Are you not going to participate in the fight? Asked Kurogiri. Shigaraki reached for his shoulder. Don't be stupid, I'm still injured, he said. That's why I brought these pets. He had to convince his master to let him have the Namu. They weren't as strong as the one from the USJ, but he and the doctor had managed to finish adjusting the behavior of 6 of them. The master had only let him have 3 of them, but even if they were weaker than his last Namu, they would be more than enough to see their mission through. Shigaraki hated that arrogant hero killer that the master had brought in. He wanted to destroy anything that he hated. It was his right to do so, his very reason for existing. The master wouldn't deny him this, though he encouraged him to use this as a learning experience. Whether he learned or not, Shigaraki didn't care. Once this night was over, the world would have forgotten the hero killer ever existed. Then, so be it, said the hero killer. Die, for Tensei, shouted Tenya, activating his engine quirk. Even with his impressive speed, Tenya was too slow for Stain, who moved faster than he could have calculated. Ingenium. So you're his brother, said Stain calmly, as if they were discussing the matter over drinks. I let him live so he could spread the good word of me. He slammed his spiked boot into Tenya's shoulder, forcing him to the ground below. You're a weakling, just like he was. Stain immediately plunged his sword into Tenya's other shoulder, blood spurting from the gaping wound. Tenya shrieked in pain. You aren't heroes, continued Stain. You have no right to be called that. Both of you are nothing but fakes. Shut up, villain, snarled Tenya. You damaged his spine and paralyzed him from the waist down. He's never going to be able to work as a pro hero again. My brother was incredible. A caring person who saved many lives. Someone people looked up to. You had no right to take that all away from him. I won't forgive you. I'll kill you. Stain pointed to the injured native, slumped against the wall. Shouldn't you be concerned about saving that guy? He said. You're so busy with your grudge that you forgot about him. You plan on using your quirk only for yourself. You're completely blinded by your selfish desire for revenge. You're about as far away from being a hero as I can imagine. Stain ripped his sword from Tenya's shoulder and bringing it to his mouth, perversely licked his blood from the blade. Tenya immediately felt a paralytic force spread throughout his body. He couldn't move, not even an inch. And that's why you'll die tonight, finished Stain. Goodbye, child. Not like this, thought Tenya. He was afraid. He had failed. The hero killer would live on, and Tensei would now lose his legs and his brother. It was over. Stain paused, his sword inches from Tenya's back. A faint whistling sound could be heard in the distance. It was getting louder. Something was approaching, fast. He brought his sword up just in time for something hard and metal to collide with it, nearly missing his head. 3 more objects were hurtled towards him again, causing him to leap away from the inured Tenya and out of the way of their trajectory. They embedded themselves in the side of the building behind him, and Stain had a moment to see they were shurikens, but shaped in an odd way. But before he could get a good look, he ducked under a swift kick, narrowly missing his head by inches. He leaped backward again, getting out of the way. Another child, clad in black armor and mask. He had 3 blades attached to each gauntlet, and the goggles he wore under his black hood glowed an intense white. Midoriya, said Tenya incredulously. How? Don't worry, Ida, said Izuku. I'm here to save you. Izuku made it just in time. He was afraid he was too late, seeing Ida laying before him. He stared the hero killer down. Every inch of him was armed to the teeth, and his very presence inspired an unholy aura of death that was palpable in the air. How did you find me? Said Ida. I'm sorry, said Izuku. I placed a tracking device on your armor. I was afraid you would try to go after the hero killer yourself. He chuckled slightly. That's what I would have done. He surveyed his surroundings. Stain was on a whole nother level than he was. He remembered Nightwing's words about a tactical retreat. We have to get out of here, get help from the pros. I can't move my body, said Ida. It must be his quirk. Shit, thought Izuku. That complicated things. If he left now, Ida would surely be killed, as well as the other hero. If it had just been Ida, he could have carried him away. But now he couldn't just leave this other hero to his fate either. Nightwing's other words came to his mind as well. Fight to your last breath, he said. But do so wisely, or it may very well be your last breath. He had to find a tactical advantage. Right now, taking care of two immobilized heroes against an experienced serial murderer didn't do him any favors. Please Midoriya, don't get involved, said Ida. This doesn't have anything to do with you. Izuku was shocked. I'm not just going to leave you here, he said. You showed up to save your friend's life, said Stain. But I have a duty to kill him in this so-called pro. When your friend chose to fight me, it guaranteed that the weaker of us would be culled. He ripped one of the batarangs Izuku threw at him off the wall. He paused. He recognized this shape after getting a good look at it. Wait, he said. This is a batarang. He turned his attention back to Izuku. Who are you? He said sharply. Izuku didn't answer. He had to act fast. Behind his back, he activated a small datapad from his utility belt. It would send out a broadcast of his location to any authority within a 5-mile radius. He had to make sure that Stain didn't see him send it. It was his only advantage. He only hoped that someone would be listening. What with the chaos going on around them, he didn't know how long he could hold the hero killer off. He also had no idea where Nightwing was, or if he was able to defeat the Namu. For now, he was on his own, and he would fight to his last breath to protect his friend. Listen to me, Midoriya, said Ida desperately. Stand down, run away. I told you this has nothing to do with you. If you really think that, said Izuku angrily, then why are you even trying to become a hero in the first place? He had more he wanted to say, but the truth was that he was ashamed. Not but a week ago he was searching for the sludge villain with intense, burning hatred in his heart, determined to do anything to find him. But now he saw the truth. If he had found the villain, even with Bruce's training, he very well could have been in the same position Ida was in now. Izuku stood tall, raising his fist towards the hero killer. I am Deku, hero in training, protege of the Batman, said Izuku. And you will harm no one today, hero killer. So long as there are lives to be saved, I will fight to my very last breath to save them. A perverse smile broke across Stain's gaunt face, and he threw back his head in a cackle that shook Izuku to his core. Yes, he shouted. Yes, this is more than I could have ever hoped for. What are you talking about? Said Izuku, alarmed. Our meeting tonight is destiny. Stain replied happily. You and I are two sides of the same coin, opposed in every way, but fighting for a better world. For you see, Boy Wonder, as you were trained at the feet of the Dark Knight, I was trained by the head of the demon himself. Head of the demon, Izuku repeated. Yes, the very man you master is destined to supplant, said Stain. But he dishonors his destiny by refusing such a gift. Realization dawned on Izuku. Ra's al Ghul, he whispered. Your League of Shadows. Do not speak his name, whelp, said Stain angrily. He is a god among men, the master who gave me the power to fulfill my noble work, to do what needs to be done to purge the world of criminals and false heroes. He drew his sword, dropping into a fighting stance. And now, we will see if you will do what needs to be done too. Fight me, son of Batman. Izuku launched into an attack, throwing batarangs towards his enemy, who deflected and dodged them readily. Izuku had to get in close, avoiding his blades. Stain swung his sword towards Izuku, who caught it in his gauntlet blades. Watch the knives, he heard Ida say. Stain attempted to slash him with the dagger in his other hand, but Izuku parried it and seized his chance to deliver a kick to Stain's chest. The hero killer flew backward, but remained on his feet. That's the spirit, he said, smiling. He lifted his dagger to his lips and licked the blade. Izuku felt as if an immense weight dropped on his back. He couldn't move. Disappointing, said Stain disdainfully. Letting yourself be overcome after such bravado. He began to approach Izuku. The Batman has much to teach you. Still, there are countless heroes around here that are all talk. But you are worthy of staying alive to fight me again another day. You are different from these two. He began to walk back towards Ida. Izuku noticed the blood dripping from the knife in his hand, and it came to him. That was why he licked his blades. It was the blood. That was the secret to his quirk. Don't, shouted Izuku as Stain lifted his blade, ready to plunge his blade into the helpless Ida. Stop. Before he could attack, a large burst of flames came flying towards the hero killer, forcing him to dodge at the last second. Someone else to stand in my way, he said angrily. Today has been full of distractions. Down at the end of the alleyway, flames burning brightly on his left side, stood Shoto Todoroki. Midoriya, said Todoroki, holding up his phone. I got your message. The pros are on their way. He launched an ice path towards Stain, lifting Izuku as well as the injured native and Ida out of the hero killer's way. He ignited his flames again and rushed forward, throwing flame attacks towards his enemy. Stain leaped from side to side to avoid the blasts. "You won't be taking any more lives, hero killer," said Todoroki, continuing his attack. "Todoroki, don't let him get your blood," said Izuku. He still struggled against the hero killer's quirk and it still continued to restrain him. "I think he controls his enemy's actions by swallowing it." Stain didn't hesitate, leaping towards Todoroki, who threw up a wall of ice to shield himself. Stain cut through the wall with ease. "You blocked your own field of vision against an opponent who is faster than you," Stain said. "Rookie mistake." Stain threw 2 daggers towards Todoroki, which embedded themselves into his arm. "You're good, kid," said Stain. Unlike him, he leaped into the air, and instead of going towards Todoroki, he bore down upon the injured native. In a few seconds, he would be upon him. Stain flew to his side as a heavy kick landed against him. Izuku had used his grapple gun to launch himself towards the hero killer, knocking him out of his path. He had control of himself now. The killer's quirk was losing its hold. "Midoriya," said Todoroki in shock. "I can move again," said Izuku. "I'm not sure how." "Does he have a time limit?" said Todoroki, more to himself. He looked at Native and Ida, who were still immobilized. Izuku should have been the last one freed if that were the case. Then it occurred to him. "What is your blood type?" "Typo," shouted Izuku, locking himself in combat with the hero killer. "That must be the secret. His quirk could be less effective against the type of blood he uses it on." "Very impressive," said Stain. "Your strength and intelligence are exactly what I expected of the student of the world's greatest detective." Stain swung his sword at Izuku's head, who dodged narrowly. Todoroki seized his moment to launch another ice attack towards him, sending him backwards to dodge. "He's too fast," said Todoroki. "He can avoid my ice and fire. If I try to carry these 2 away, I'd leave myself exposed." He gestured to the injured Ida and native. "We have to hold off until the pros come and avoid close combat." Izuku charged his explosive gauntlets. He wanted to avoid using them as they were fighting in an enclosed space and was afraid of hurting native and Ida. But now he had no choice. He had to keep Stain at a distance. "You've lost too much blood," said Izuku, looking at Todoroki's injured arm. "You need to stay back and protect them." He gestured to Native and Ida. "I'll take care of Stain." "You're taking a big risk, Midoriya," said Todoroki. But he couldn't deny that he was right. If he lost any more blood, he would be just as useless to Izuku as the other 2. "All right, be careful." "Come on, boy wonder," said Stain. "Show me what you've really got." Ida continued to fight against the quirk that restrained him, but it was no use. This wasn't what he wanted. He didn't want his classmates to risk their lives to save him. This was his fight. The words of Stain and Midoriya played over in his head as if through a loop. "Shouldn't you be worried about saving that guy?" "Don't worry, Ida. I'm here to save you." "You have to run," he said to Todoroki, tears streaming down his eyes. "I can't watch this." "You want to make your brother proud," said Todoroki, throwing more ice and fire at Stain as Izuku fought him off. "Then stand up and become ingenium. Become the hero you wanted to be." Izuku yelled as Stain sliced at his leg. He was immobile again. But instead of cutting him down, Stain rushed towards Todoroki. His fighting style had changed. His attacks were wild, like a wounded animal fighting against predators. This sudden aggression made him much more frightening, and much more dangerous. Todoroki threw his fire and ice against Stain, desperately trying to keep him back. But the hero killer got past his barrage. He managed to reach his left arm and ripped out one of the daggers that was embedded in it. Todoroki yelled in pain, but soon froze as Stain licked the blood, leaving him helpless. They were all down. The tide had turned in Stain's favor. "It was a valiant effort," said Stain, "but a fruitless one. You may soon be free of my quirk soon, boy wonder, but they'll all be dead by the time you are." He drew his blade, ready to strike Ida once again. "Starting with him." "Stop," shouted Izuku as Stain drew his sword, ready to plunge it into the helpless Ida. Izuku strained against the weight of Stain's quirk. He had to stop him before he murdered his friends, but he still had minutes left before he could move again. He thought back to his fight with Shinso. There had to be a fundamental similarity, as they both worked on controlling their enemies. He desperately recalled his training with Bruce, all the physical and mental conditioning he put him through. He focused his mind, remembering the words that Bruce had told him. "Your body is your own," he had said. "No power or quirk can overpower your force of will. It can only confuse the mind or overwhelm your senses. Focus is the key. Focus, and no trap, no power, no restraint can hold you." Izuku had to focus. He only had seconds. "Get up, Deku," Izuku screamed at himself internally. "You are a hero and you need to save them." Get up, now. Izuku's muscles began to budge. Slowly, he strained as he lifted himself off the ground. Stain turned back to him, shocked. Impossible, he said. You managed to summon the will to fight against my quirk. He drew his sword back on Izuku. What are you? I told you, hero killer, I am the hero Deku, Izuku said, dropping back into a hero stance. I won't let you kill them. I will save them, no matter what. You may be able to stand, said Stain. But there's no way you can fight against me and my quirk at the same time. He charged Izuku again, locking his sword in Izuku's gauntlet blades. Izuku used his explosive gauntlets, connecting the against the hero killer's chest. Stain yelled in pain as the explosion sent him backwards and against the wall of the alleyway. After a moment, he rallied and continued his attack, but Izuku was ready for him. He caught his sword again, this time in both his gauntlet spikes, and used the explosions to give him extra force as he snapped the sword into pieces. Stain roared in anger and kicked Izuku in the solar plexus, sending him backwards. Izuku was winded, but otherwise okay. He could feel the quirk's hold wearing off, and his movements were faster, but he was fatigued. He didn't know how much longer he could last. But he had to fight, for the sake of his friends. Stain launched himself atop of Midoriya, trying to drive his daggers into his chest. Come on, boy wonder, he shouted at Izuku. Fight me with everything you have. Show me you are worthy of killing me. Izuku kicked into Stain's chest, flipping him over. He threw a barrage of explosions at the hero killer from his gauntlets, but Stain was too fast. He dodged the attacks and threw himself back onto Izuku, using his momentum to throw him into the wall. Izuku moved just in time as a dagger plunged into the wall behind him where his chest was before. Izuku countered with a spinning kick against Stain's head. He rolled from the force of the kick, but sprung back to his feet. Their fight continued, and Izuku felt himself growing weary. The hero killer's attacks seemed endless, and he didn't know how much longer he could fight. Out of nowhere, something large came flying towards them at blinding speed, connecting with Stain in his side, sending him hurtling into one of the walls of the building. It was Ida. He was standing. Are you all right, Midoriya? Said Ida. I'm fine, said Izuku. He looked down at the blood dripping down Ida's arm. You've lost a lot of blood. I'm fine, said Ida. I'll stand by you. Such tenacity, said Stain ferociously. Why won't you stay down? Now, Midoriya, said Ida. Let's finish this. As Stain rushed towards them, all thoughts of self-preservation forgotten, Izuku charged his explosive gauntlets, and Ida let loose a reciproburst kick. With their combined attack, they struck the hero killer down, who hit the ground hard in a heap and lay there motionless. Izuku began to breathe a sigh of relief, which was halted as he saw the hero killer slowly struggle to his knees. Well done, boy wonder, he said to Izuku. You have bested me almost single-handedly. He pushed his discarded dagger towards Izuku. You are worthy, he said. End it. Kill me. It's the only way. I will never stop my crusade. Do what your master won't. Do what needs to be done. Izuku froze, looking at Ida, who hung his head in shame. It all made sense to him now. None of this would have happened if he hadn't foolishly tried to face Stain alone. He endangered himself and his friends, and they all could have lost their lives today. Now that the moment has come, the desire for revenge had left him, replaced only with regret. It made him think of his own thoughts of revenge, the burning hatred inside of him for the sludge villain. He now understood Bruce's words to him. No, said Izuku, turning back to Stain. I will never kill. Not even you. He kicked the hero killer upside the head, knocking him unconscious. It was over. The hero killer was down. They won. Nightwing and the creature from the train were tumbling fast towards the ground below. The creature was strong. Very strong. Even at maximum setting, the creature barely reacted to the electric bursts of his stun batons. He began to wonder if the creature could feel pain at all. They were approaching the ground fast, and the creature had a tight grip on him, preventing him from getting away. Thinking quickly, he thrust his batons into the creature's gaping mouth, powerful electricity reverberating throughout its body. Nightwing's suit was shock resistant, so he wasn't affected, and the creature let go long enough so he could grapple away. The creature hit the ground with a sickening splat. It lay there motionless, and at first Nightwing thought that it was dead. But after a moment, the creature slowly pulled itself up. Nightwing winced as its limbs grotesquely cracked as it repositioned them. The creature then turned away from Nightwing, seeming to lose interest, and started attacking the civilian bystanders around it. Leave them alone, shouted Nightwing, leaping towards the creature. Before he could reach it, a huge burst of flames engulfed the creature, causing Nightwing to stop in his tracks. He turned to see a large man walking towards him. He was wearing a dark blue jumpsuit, heavy boots and gauntlets, both blazing with red flames, extending to his chest and shoulders. Even his hair and beard was alight with these flames. Nightwing recognized him as Endeavor, the #2 hero. Thanks for the assist, kid, said Endeavor. He paused. Wait, I recognize you. You're the Bat's sidekick, aren't you? No, I'm not, said Nightwing, not bothering to hide his annoyance. My name is Nightwing. I'm with the Justice League. Right, said Endeavor. He obviously didn't care. Well, thank you for the assist, but I'll take it from here. He looked back at the creature as the flames died away. It seemed unharmed by the blast of fire. That was a low-temp warning shot. But even still, it always KOS my opponent. He launched a more powerful blast at the creature. It took more damage, but remained largely unharmed. This time, however, it seemed to grow in size. It doubled over on its haunches and launched itself into the air towards Endeavor. Watch it, shouted Nightwing. It's got more than one quirk. The creature opened its mouth and large tendrils began to form from inside it before immediately thrusting towards Endeavor. Nightwing drew a capsule from his belt and threw it into the gaping maw of the creature, which caused it to swallow. In a second, the creature's chest exploded from the inside out. The creature fell to the ground in a heap, its breath rattling before finally ceasing. Not too bad, kid, said Endeavor, impressed despite himself. He looked over the horizon, towards the red haze past the buildings. Yells and explosions echoed from that location towards them. That must be where the other heroes are. It's been several minutes, they should have wrapped things up by now. He paused, suddenly realizing that a pager on his belt was going off. With all the chaos, he didn't notice it before. It was an alert for assistance needed at an alleyway at 4210 Eku Street. Realization dawned on him. A few minutes ago, Shoto had run off towards that location, saying that there was something he needed to see there. He turned to Nightwing. Leave this creature to my sidekicks. They'll see to it that the police get to it. There's an address I need you to investigate for me. Izuku, Ida, and Todoroki began to tie up the unconscious Stain, removing his assorted blades and weapons. Native had regained his ability to move, and was assisting them. I should apologize, he said. I'm supposed to be a pro, but I was totally helpless back there. No, said Izuku. With his training and his quirk, I don't think any one hero could take him on and win. The three of us barely won, said Todoroki, and even then it was because of his own mistakes. He was getting riled up and desperate. Still, he turned to Izuku. You were able to overcome his quirk, without even having to wait for the recovery time. Even he was surprised. He motioned to Stain. It's just like back at the sports festival. If it wasn't for your indomitable will, we'd all be dead. Well, let's get him to the police as fast as we can, said Native. We can, kid. They all looked to see Nightwing running towards them. I thought I told you to stay back. He shouted. These creatures are strong. You could get hurt. Remember what I said about being reckless. He trailed off, his eyes falling on the unconscious figure dragging behind them. Is that who I think it is? He said quietly. Depends on who you think it is, said Izuku slowly. What's going on? Several more heroes came running towards them. Endeavor told us there was trouble here. Kids, said one of the heroes, surprised. Those injuries look bad. Let's get you some help. One of them gasped. Look at this. The hero killer, said another. Did you take him down, Native? No, said Native, gesturing towards the boys. It was them. The heroes all began fussing over the boys, tending to their injuries and asking them about the fight. Several were impressed. Some chastised them about going after the hero killer alone. It's my fault, said Ida shamefully. They were both hurt because of me. The other heroes began busying themselves about, preparing for the arrival of the police. Izuku, Todoroki, and Ida nursed their wounds, waiting for the ambulance to arrive to take them to the hospital. I'm sorry, said Id, turning towards Izuku and Todoroki. He sunk into a deep bow, and Izuku saw tears dropping to the ground below him. I'm truly sorry. I was so angry. I couldn't see anything else. Izuku lifted his friend from his bow. I'm sorry too, Ida, he said. The truth is, I know. Izuku was interrupted by collective shouts in surprise. Something had grabbed him hard on the back, and in a moment's notice he was lifted into the air and away from his friends. He looked back to see he was being spirited away by the flying Namu. It was bleeding profusely from the side of its head, a gaping hole from where its eye used to be. Put me down, he shouted, wrestling to get free. The creature continued to climb higher and higher, but in an instant it went rigid and began to lose altitude. Izuku saw a red blur out of the corner of his eye, bearing down on the Namu. He heard a sickening sound, like a knife being plunged into flesh, and he and the Namu fell to the ground below. Izuku's body screamed in pain from the fall and struggled to look up. When he did, the hero killer was standing over him and the Namu. He had escaped his bindings. Because the creature's blood was everywhere, he had used his quirk against the creature and seized his chance to kill it, saving Izuku. Not today, boy wonder, he said to Izuku. His eyes burned with an intensity that would make even the bravest of men falter. His mask had fallen, revealing a disfigured face lined with cuts and scars, and a hole where once was a nose. He was like a living skeleton, an embodiment of death itself. "Everything I do to create a stronger society," he continued, blood and drool dripping from his face. "What's going on?" came a booming voice. Endeavor came running towards the group of heroes. He stopped short at the scene in front of him. "Hold on, is that hero killer?" Endeavor's flames grew, and he formed them into a spear that only he could throw, one of his special moves, the one he used to take out the eye of the Namu before it got away. "Endeavor, wait," shouted Nightwing. "He's got a hostage." Stain turned to face the heroes at the sound of Endeavor's name. "You," he growled, deep and guttural. The whole world around them seemed to change, as if everything at once had turned blood red, burning with the intensity of hell itself. The passion of a madman. "You false hero, I'll make this right. These streets must run with the blood of hypocrites." He began to advance on the heroes before him. Many of them were frozen in fear of his intense hatred. Nightwing put himself between Izuku's classmates and Stain, ready to defend them. "Hero," shouted Stain, "I will reclaim that word. Only the worthy shall be a hero." Stain stopped in his tracks, dropping the bloodied knife in his hand, and finally collapsed in a heap. Behind him, a tall, dark figure had suddenly appeared, and in an instant had knocked him unconscious again. Swiftly, he bent down, producing large handcuffs and placing them on the hero killer's wrists. "That's enough," said Batman. "You're finished, assassin." Izuku, Ida and Todoroki all sat on their beds at the Hosu hospital. It was morning, but neither of them slept much. The events from the previous night still ran freshly through their minds. One could argue that it was a miracle that they were even still alive. Stain didn't seem to want to kill Izuku, perhaps out of some perverse form of kinship. He had an uneasy feeling that it wasn't the last he would see of the hero killer. Izuku was impressed with Todoroki and Ida. They had fought so hard, and he was proud to have fought alongside them. He had commended Todoroki's use of his quirk, and Ida's strength to fight back despite his blood loss. Ida did not feel as proud as Izuku felt for him, however. He still blamed himself for the whole situation, especially his friends getting hurt. The door to their room opened suddenly, with Nightwing, Manuel, and Batman walking through the door. "The Youngbloods are awake," said Nightwing. He walked over to Izuku and sat on the edge of the bed. "Nightwing," said Izuku. "Batman, I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have gone off by myself. I didn't mean to worry." "Someone is here to see you," said Batman, interrupting Izuku. Behind him, a large man wearing a three-piece suit walked into the room. He stood at least a foot over the already immensely tall Batman, and instead of a human head he bore the face of a bloodhound. "This is Hosu's chief of police, Kenji Tsuragami." The boys began to stand in respect, but the chief let out a small, bark-like cough. "Please, stay seated," he said. "So, you're the US students who brought down the hero killer, huh?" "We are," said Todoroki. "Stain has some serious injuries," said the chief. "Severe burns and several broken bones. Right now he is under strict guard." He let out another bark-like cough. "Here's a lesson you should have already learned. When quirks became the norm, the police force sought to maintain the status quo. They decided we wouldn't use quirks as weapons. That's when heroes came in. They could do what we couldn't if they were licensed, of course. It would be impossible for the police to condone the use of deadly quirks. After all, we're here to stop such harm from being done. The only reason pros can use their powers now is because of the strict code of ethics that the early heroes chose to abide by. That's why it's against the law for uncertified people to use their quirks to cause injury. Whether you were up against the hero killer or not, unlicensed heroes don't have the authority to harm the villain." He turned to the heroes present with him. "The law states that you and your supervisors should receive harsh punishments for this gross abuse of your powers." "Wait a minute," said Todoroki. "If Ida had not stepped in, Native would have been murdered. And if not for Midoriya, they'd both be dead." "Todoroki," began Ida. "Listen to what he has to say." "Todoroki," said Batman. Despite his indignation, Batman's intimidating nature was enough to inspire silence. The police chief coughed again and continued. "It is not okay to break the law as long as it goes your way," he said. "This is the official stance of the police department. But any punishment would only be necessary if this went public." He tapped his dog-like nose knowingly. "As it stands, there are two options available to you that mitigate that punishment. 1. You can give the credit of the capture to Endeavor. Stain's burns would support the story and we could say that you weren't involved. It would mean no one would know about you, and you would receive no acclaim at all, but it would be the last you would hear about any punishments. And the other option? Asked Todoroki. In all technicality, the punishment would only fall to you and young Ida as well as your direct supervisors, replied the chief. He turned to Izuku. As I understand it, you don't have a quirk. While it was irresponsible to pursue the hero killer at all, even without the use of superpowers, we cannot legally hold you to a law that regulates quirks. It could be argued that you are acting as a concerned citizen, operating in self-defense. It is a technicality, but a viable one. What are you saying? Asked Izuku. I'm saying that the credit for the takedown could go to you, said the chief. There are many pros and cons to this stance, however, you are still a pro hero in training. You used tools at your disposal to help take down the hero killer, but you did not use a quirk to take down the hero killer. This would reflect well on yourself as well as UA, a student who upholds the law and still is able to save the day. However, said the chief warningly, you would no longer be an agent unto yourself. This would place a huge responsibility on your shoulders, one that many in your shoes would not be ready to take on at such an early age. The public spotlight would glare down upon you more so than ever before. Many would applaud you, many would condemn you for borderline vigilantism. But one thing would be clear, you did not use a quirk, you did not break any hero laws, and no punishment would befall your friends. No, I don't want that, said Izuku immediately. We took down Stain together. I'm not taking all the credit. I don't even want to be in the spotlight. I did what I did to save my friend. Are you sure? Said the chief. The choice is yours. I'm sure, said Izuku. Right guys, he added, turning to Todoroki and Ida. They were silent. Guys, Izuku said, puzzled. Midoriya, said Ida. You fought the hardest against the hero killer than any of us. If it wasn't for you, I would be dead. I agree, said Todoroki. You were the one to find Ida and the hero killer. You were the one who fought the hardest against him. In the end, we were all helpless to his quirk, and you fought through it to save us. In all reality, the victory goes to you. No, said Izuku. I won't accept that. If it wasn't for you. Think about it, Midoriya, said Ida. Stain didn't want to kill you. He said himself you were worthy. You acted as a true hero should. You should get the credit. I don't care, said Midoriya. The credit goes to Endeavor. If that is your choice, then so be it, said the chief. I don't want to damage any promising young careers over a mistake like this. I know it's not fair. You won't enjoy any of the fame and praise you probably would have received otherwise. He sunk into a deep bow. At least, allow me, as the chief of police, to thank you. The chief of police departed, and Ida and Todoroki left the room as well, Ida to speak with Manuel, and Todoroki went to order breakfast for them, leaving Izuku alone with Batman and Nightwing. Since this guy is so sparing with his praise, I'll just go ahead and say it, said Nightwing, gesturing to Batman. You did a good thing there. A hero doesn't look for praise and acknowledgement. But still, you better remember what I told you about taking unnecessary risks. If something had happened to you, Batman would have painted the walls of the Batcave with my insides. Wrong, said Batman. I would have made you paint the walls of the Batcave with your insides. Nightwing shuddered slightly. Well, in any sense, it all worked out for the best. You learned something from this experience that you're not saying, said Batman, staring Izuku down. Haven't you? Izuku averted his eyes. Ida was nearly killed because of his hatred for Stain. He said quietly. You now see where the path of revenge leads, and its consequences, said Batman. True vengeance lies in justice, and justice alone. I guess you were right, said Izuku. I'm not ready to fight the sludge villain, even if we did know where he was. I wouldn't say that, said Bruce. Izuku looked up sharply. What do you mean? I haven't stopped looking for the villain since he escaped, said Batman. And last night, my network finally picked up a lead. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Your willingness to spare the life of one who would not hesitate to end another has proven your growth. Be ready, for when your wounds heal, we will finally bring this creature to justice, once and for all. Later that evening, Izuku's mind was racing, swirling with thoughts and implications about Bruce's news. It was only a lead, but it was the first one they had in over a year. He had waited for this moment for so long, and now it may be upon him. With his fight with the hero killer still fresh in his mind, he felt a new sense of confidence in his skills and abilities, but images of his last encounter with the villain also circled through his mind. The fear he felt, as palpable as the muck that had encased him when the villain tried to suffocate him. He tried to push it away. After all, he had the world's greatest detective with him now. But no matter how hard he tried, the fear would bubble back. He nearly jumped out of his skin as he felt his phone go off next to him, causing Todoroki and Ida, who had returned earlier, to look at him curiously. Looking at his phone, Izuku saw the message was from Bruce, and it consisted of only one line. Channel 5. Right now. Confused, Izuku turned on the TV and turned it to Channel 30. Two news anchors were reporting on the attack in Hosu City, including the involvement and capture of the Namu, and their connection to the League of Villains, and then moved on to the capture of the hero killer Stain. The hero killer Stain claimed many lives, said one anchor. In fact, he has more victims than any other criminal since All Might burst into the scene. With his arrest, everyone in the country can rest a little easier tonight. And we have one person in particular to thank for that, said the other anchor. Young izukumidoriya, first-year Hero Academy student at UA High School. Izuku felt his stomach drop to his feet as they threw his picture up on screen. They began to go on about how a hero student was able to bring down the hero killer without the use of a quirk, obeying the law while protecting citizens, and how he represents an underserved population of heroes and citizens alike. He turned to Ida and Todoroki. Guys, he stammered, struggling to find the words. I didn't. But he paused. They were both smiling at him. What? He said. What's going on? We know you didn't, Midoriya, said Todoroki. We did. What do you mean? Said Izuku. After the chief of police left, Todoroki and I caught up with him, said Ida. We insisted that you get the credit for the capture. But why? Said Izuku, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. Because you deserve it, Midoriya, said Ida. I owe you my life, you and Todoroki. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. For that, I can never repay you. People have told me I'm strong all my life, said Todoroki. Especially my worthless father, always telling me I was different from everyone else, and how I was destined to surpass All Might. But even I wasn't able to hold against Stain on my own. Ever since our fight during the battle training, I have been chasing to catch up with you. It's time the world recognized your strength as well, and the strength of those like you, instead of just focusing on flashy quirks like ours. You guys, said Izuku, tearing up. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, said Ida. He looked down at his injured arms. I got my test results back earlier today. My left hand might have damage that's permanent. Most of the damage was to my brachial plexus, which basically means I'll have trouble moving my fingers. He looked back up at Izuku. But that's a small price to pay for my negligence. You were the whole reason that I survived. I was too blind to see past my anger and desire for revenge. This is all I deserve. That's not true, Ida, said Izuku. I told you before, I know what it's like to want revenge. I haven't told many people this, but before I came to UA High. He paused, the words choking in his throat. I was responsible for my friend being killed by a villain. Todoroki and Ida started in shock. For a while, I gave up my dreams of being a hero, Izuku continued. How could I possibly become a hero when I was responsible for the death of my best friend? But that was when Batman found me. He told me that he could help me bring my friend's killer to justice, and to do so I would need to become a hero. But it wasn't until recently that I learned how much I wanted revenge against the villain. For a while, I wasn't able to think of anything else. He placed a hand on Ida's shoulder. Then I saw how much you were suffering, and how you were suffering alone. I at least have my mentor to help me, but you were dealing with this all on your own. It made me realize that I never wanted to suffer like this again, and I didn't want others to suffer like this either. He looked between Ida and Todoroki, stretching his hand outward. Let's get stronger together, guys. That way, others won't have to suffer like we did. You got it, Midoriya, said Ida, placing his hand on Izuku's. Let's do it, said Todoroki, doing the same. Izuku felt his phone go off again. He pulled it out, and noticed he had several text messages from his classmates, several from his mother, and even from some he didn't recognize. The phone didn't stop vibrating. 5 messages, 10 messages, 15 messages. They just kept coming. Izuku had the feeling that he had a lot of explaining to do once he got back to school. A phone call is here. A phone call is here. All Might forgot to put his phone on silent, slightly embarrassed by the looks he got from Aizawa and Present Mike as he answered his phone. Yes, hello, Tashinori. The voice that came from the other end of the phone caused him to shoot straight up out of his chair, startling his coworkers. Even though Gran Torino hadn't been his teacher for many years, he was still quite nervous around him. Hi sir, he sputtered, attempting to wipe the blood away that dripped down his chin. He excused himself from his desk and found a quiet place to talk. What do I owe this pleasure? It's been a while since we last talked, said Gran Torino. Why don't you come visit me more often? Sorry, sir, said All Might. It's just that my new life as a teacher has me so busy. Well, that's not the reason I called anyway, said Gran Torino. It's in light of these recent events that I thought it best that I tell you. Batman came to see me the other day. What? Said All Might, surprised. He's been investigating the League of Villains, as you know, Gran Torino continued. and he came to me for confirmation on his findings. He didn't want me to tell you at first, because he wasn't entirely sure, but after the recent events, I don't think there is a doubt in my mind anymore. First of all, the hero killer's ideology is one that rivals yours. People are going to find out about him, and there are going to be people throughout the globe who will be inspired by his ideals. If that's true, and he does inspire copycat villains, they'll probably strike out on their own, said All Might. The heroes will stop them, just like they did this time. That's where the League of Villains come in, said Gran Torino. The Hosu incident suggested that Stain and the League are connected somehow. That means the League will go from a bunch of juvenile delinquents that attacked UA to being recognized as a group with an ideology. These new converts will seek them out. All Might was silent. If this was true, this meant that even if each individual is insignificant, if that evil gathers under one banner, it will swell to unstoppable proportions. If the villain in charge knew this would happen from the beginning, Gran Torino continued, then he is a brilliant strategist. He's steadily getting rid of any obstacles, one by one, trying to create conditions that will favor his own purpose. When All Might faced the Namu at the USJ, learning that he had multiple quirks gave him a bad feeling. He went to his friend on the police force, Tsukachi, who confirmed that Namu did indeed have multiple quirks, and that he bore all the signs of a man who had those quirks forced upon him. It did little to quell All Might's fears. What if he's back? Said All Might. Could he have survived his injuries? I don't know, Toshinori, said Gran Torino. But you need to be ready. Batman is concerned. I can sense it. And you and I both know that means something big is on the horizon. We both need to be ready for whatever happens. The hero killer Stain lay in a hospital bed. He didn't know how long he had been there, as he had been drifting in and out of consciousness as the hospital staff worked on him. Now he was fully awake, handcuffed and surrounded by police. But today, he had another visitor, the Dark Knight himself. For the past few hours, he had been interrogating the hero killer on his connections to both the League of Villains, trying to gather intel on their operations. You're wasting your time, Dark Knight, said Stain. I have nothing to say to you. Batman pulled up a holographic image on his gauntlet computer. It was an image of Stain standing on a rooftop with Tamura Shigaraki and Kurogiri. You were seen with two known members of the League of Villains, said Batman. Their highest-ranking members. You are connected with the League, Assassin. That much is known. Now tell me what I want to know. I don't have anything to tell you, said Stain, sneering. Shigaraki is a fool who lacks conviction. I would have killed him tonight myself if I hadn't been stopped by your whelp and his friends. You got off easy, said Batman. Perhaps, said Stain. You trained your boy well, Dark Knight. He is worthy, even at such a young age. Perhaps one day he will fulfill the destiny you have rejected and succeed the master as head of the demon. Roz won't come near him, snarled Batman. And neither will you. It's not me you should be concerned about, Batman, said Stain. What are you talking about? Shigaraki has it out for your boy, said Stain. He wants him dead, almost as much as he does All Might. And when it comes to Shigaraki, the only true convictions he has are in death and destruction. You better hope that your training is enough, Dark Knight. Your ward is marked for death. At these words, Batman said nothing, simply turning on his heel and walking out the room into the hospital hallway, where the Finley All Might was waiting for him. Young Midoriya, said All Might, concerned. This is bad. It can't be helped, said Batman. He's involved now, whether we like it or not. What do we do? Said All Might. We have to tell him the truth, said Batman. Your Quirk, the League, all for one. All of it. Izuku had never been so hounded in all his life. Ever since it became public that he took down the hero killer, everyone wanted a piece of him. Reporters had flocked outside of the hospital he was recovering in hopes to get the inside scoop. They were turned away by the police and hospital security, but they were persistent nonetheless. One daring reporter even dressed up as hospital staff in an attempt to get an interview with Izuku. Thankfully, she was recognized and escorted out by security before she reached him. Izuku had spent a few hours going through the texts that he had received. Most of them were from his classmates, all wanting details on the situation. Uraraka had been the first one to call him, and after enduring a long scolding from her about taking on dangerous villains, Izuku explained his cover story to her and then to the rest of his classmates, which had been prepared for him by the Hosu chief of police. He was separated from Nightwing during the Namu attack, and had stumbled upon the hero killer by accident, who had attacked him after mistaking him for a hero. He had managed to subdue Stain long enough for the pro-heroes to show up and take him away. Luckily, there weren't many witnesses, and the pros that were there corroborated the story, as they felt he deserved the credit just as much as Todoroki and Ida felt he did. They accepted his story, and they all pressed him for more details, but he retained his silence, sticking only to the cover story. He had a feeling, however, that he wouldn't hear the last of it when he returned to school. But that was the least of Izuku's concerns. Izuku was standing outside his apartment building, waiting for Alfred to pick him up, lost in thought. Alfred, Bruce and Dick had all stayed in Japan, picking up on the lead on the sludge villain he hadn't heard much about over the past few days. It was only a small lead, and he had managed to evade them for over a year. But Bruce assured him that the ground was slowly shrinking beneath the villain's feet, and he wouldn't be able to hide much longer. Izuku was broken out of his thoughts by the sound of Alfred pulling up in the Rolls-Royce. He stepped out of the car and opened the door for Izuku, a gesture that always made him uncomfortable. But Alfred would hear none of it. "Good morning, Master Midoriya," said Alfred, nodding to him. Or should I say, the hero Deku. "Good morning, Alfred," said Izuku, ignoring Alfred's jest. The truth was, he didn't mind taking the train, but Bruce had sent Alfred around as he felt it would be best to avoid being accosted on his way by people who wanted to see the boy who took down the hero killer. "I dare say, it must be quite something to have one's image plastered all over the telly," continued Alfred, driving away from the curb. Mind you, Master Bruce never cared for such notoriety. Most of the time his primetime spotlights consisted of warrants for his arrest. He looked back at Izuku, who remained silent. "Is something amiss, Master Midoriya?" "Sorry," said Izuku. "I'm just preoccupied, I guess." "I understand," said Alfred knowingly. "Master Bruce and Master Grayson are both hot on the sludge villain's trail. It shan't be long before he is caught." Alfred paused, considering Izuku. "Though, that is precisely what is bothering you, isn't it?" Izuku didn't answer. For the past year, his burning desire to be a hero was based on finding the sludge villain. He wasn't even a proper hero yet, and that goal was already within his grasp. Gone were the days of wanderlust when he dreamed loftily about being the next All Might, replaced instead with grounded reality. "If I may, Master Midoriya," said Alfred, "you are not alone in this fight. Master Bruce has always had to fight this battle alone, and though I have been there for him, he had to pave the path you now walk by himself. But you do not have to bear such a burden alone. Remember that. We're here, sir," Alfred added, pulling up to UA High. "Thanks, Alfred," said Izuku, climbing out of the car. "For everything." "My pleasure, Master Midoriya," said Alfred. "Midoriya." Class 1 collectively began to swarm Izuku as he entered the room. He had to steel himself for this the moment he entered the school, as many people stared and whispered at him as he walked through the hallways. Several people even cheered and congratulated him. He found the attention overwhelming, but it paled in comparison to his classmates' reaction. "Hail the conquering hero," said Kirishima, patting Izuku hard on the back. "I still can't believe you took down the hero killer," said Maita. "What's so hard to believe about it?" said Takoyami. "He was trained by the Dark Knight." "Still, we were worried," said Yaoyorozu. "It was a good thing the pros showed up when they did, though," said Sato. "Who knows how much longer you could have kept him subdued." "What was it like when you were fighting him?" said Ishido. "Terrifying," said Izuku truthfully. "They say that he was somehow connected to the League of Villains," said Ajiro. "Can you imagine how terrifying it would have been if he'd been there when they attacked the USJ?" "He's scary, yes," said Kaminari. "But have you seen him in that weird video? It's all over the internet." "I didn't know there was a video," said Ajiro. "Yeah," said Kaminari. "He once wanted to be a hero, inspired by All Might, but felt disillusioned with society and set out to correct it on his own. He's evil and all that, but he's super tenacious. It's kinda cool when you think about it." "Kaminari," Izuku snapped. Kaminari looked at Izuku, only noticing that Ida was standing right beside him. Realization dawned on him and he covered his mouth in shock. "I'm so sorry," he said. "No, it's okay," said Ida. "I can see why people would find the hero killer interesting. His beliefs are almost noble. But instead of helping the world, he turned to cold-blooded murder. No matter his motives, killing cannot be condoned." Kaminari cleared his throat awkwardly. The fun atmosphere dropped immediately, and everyone went back to their seats. Izuku was impressed. Ida had already showed a lot of growth since their time in Hosu. Aizawa entered the room and everyone fell silent. He instructed them to get into their gear and to head to Training Field Gamma, where All Might would be there to meet them for hero training. All Might stood outside the gates of Training Field Gamma and watched as Class 1 gathered around. All Might had been growing more and more impressed by Midoriya, especially seeing him on the news. By taking down the hero killer, he had already accomplished more than most pros in their entire careers, and he wasn't even done with school yet. Today he was going to see just how strong he has become. "I am here," he shouted to the class. "Hope you're ready to return to your lessons. Today is hero basic training. It seems like I haven't seen you in a while. Good to have you back." Today, we're going to be doing something a little different, tactical espionage. The class glanced around, surprised. All Might was a little out of his element when it came to espionage, something that was more Aizawa's specialty. Without missing a beat, Ida's hand shot straight up in the air. "Sir," he said, "if we are focusing on espionage, shouldn't we be in the other training field, like when we did the battle training?" "A good question," said All Might, "but this isn't your regular espionage training. This is also a race. Training Field Gamma is an area full of factories that form an intricate labyrinth. You're going to be tasked with seeking out and finding an evildoer hiding somewhere in this great maze. But the caveat is that you have to find him before he finds you, or you lose the exercise." "This is going to be so great," said Hagakure. Being invisible, she would have a great advantage in this exercise. "Who are we going to be finding?" said Tsuyu. "For that, I asked a special guest to assist me," said All Might. He pressed a button on a remote control and the doors behind him opened up. Izuku stared in surprise and the class gasped collectively. They saw the familiar large, powerful figure step forward from the darkness. "Batman!" shouted Kirishima excitedly. The class gazed in amazement as he stepped up next to All Might. Even though the symbol of peace was much bigger than Batman in terms of physical size, All Might seemed to pale in comparison to his sheer intimidating presence. "Wait, we have to find him," said Mainta, frightened. "Before he finds you?" "Yes," said All Might, laughing. "Everyone expects hero work to be big explosions and powerful enemies, and while this is true, it is just as important to develop your abilities in stealth and espionage. If you can get the drop on the enemy, you can end the fight before it even begins. You're all going to be given capture tape. The objective is to capture your enemy. If he manages to evade your capture until the time runs out, you lose. But also, be warned, if you find him, you better be prepared for a fight. If he manages to capture you, that will also result in a defeat." The class gave each other uneasy glances. They did not relish the idea of being captured by Batman. "Now, everyone, let's get ready," exclaimed All Might. "We're all going at once," said Yaoyorozu. "As I said, this is a race," said All Might, "and also an exercise in problem solving. You could choose to go it alone and try to capture your quarry, or you can work in groups and share the glory. It's up to you. Now, it's time to prepare yourselves. You have 5 minutes. Once again, Izuku found himself bombarded with questions. "What do we do, Midoriya?" said Kirishima. "He's not going to hurt us, is he?" said Mainta. "I've heard what he does to villains." "He's not going to hurt you," said Izuku, half-truthfully. He knew Batman wasn't going to be as vicious on them as he is on the common criminal, but he decided to spare them the horror stories about what he endured during his training. "The best thing we can do is stick together in groups. He is nearly unstoppable to take one-on-one, and he's going to try to separate us so he can pick us off." Mainta let out a small frightened squeak, and the rest of the class still looked uneasy. Izuku could hardly blame them. In this maze, Batman was in his element, and that was enough to drive fear into even the bravest of men. There were ample places to hide, areas where he could easily get the drop on them. Izuku was afraid that some of his classmates would panic once faced with him. "I need you to trust me," said Izuku to his classmates. "We need to stick together. It's our best chance." "Class 1A," shouted All Might, to the starting line. To say that Field Gamma was a maze was an understatement. It seemed to stretch for miles, with twists and turns that led to nowhere. At the sound of the starting bell, the class made their way into the labyrinth. The tension in the air was palpable. Already Izuku's senses told him they were being watched. This was a classic move for Batman. An uneasy mind plays tricks on you, and only helps in making him more frightening. The area around them was silent, eerily silent compared to the booming voice they just left behind. Izuku shook his head. He had to get a hold of himself. If he let his fear get the better of him, then the rest of them couldn't hope to win. "We need to stay close together, everyone," he whispered, just loud enough for them to hear. "He's probably already got a bead on us, so we..." A large explosion rocked Field Gamma, nearly knocking them off balance. "What the hell was that?" said Zero. "Look," shouted Mainta, pointing towards the direction of the explosion. The walls and pipes of the maze in front of them began to collapse, and was steadily dominoing its way towards the group. "Everyone take cover," shouted Izuku, leaping out of the way of the cascade. The wreckage came crashing down around them, covering them in dust and debris. After a moment, the dust began to settle, and Izuku could hear coughing from several of his classmates. "Is everyone all right?" said Izuku, dusting himself off. Several of his other classmates began to pick themselves up from the wreckage. "He dropped a freaking building on us," shouted Kirishima, bursting from the wreckage. "I thought you said he wasn't going to hurt us." "This wasn't meant to hurt us," he said. He turned on his cowl vision and surveyed his surroundings. He, Shiro, Kirishima, Uraraka, Shoji, and Takoyami were together, while several of his classmates were on the other side of a giant wall of debris that separated them. He's breaking us up into smaller groups. Then we need to find him fast, said Takoyami. I agree, said Izuku. He walked over to the wall, calling over to the other side. Is everyone okay? We're fine, came the muffled voice of Ida. No one is injured. Good. Let's make use of this situation and spread out, but not too far, said Izuku. We'll find a rendezvous point where we can meet up later. Izuku pulled out a radio from his utility belt and threw it over the wall. Use this to keep in contact with us. Don't let him separate you further. Just make for the center of the maze. We'll meet you there. Okay, said Ida through the radio. See you there. Mineta was coughing, his eyes watering from the dust around him. He was disoriented and couldn't hear any of his classmates around him. After the dust settled, a quick glance around him confirmed that he was indeed alone. Alone with the Batman. He had to find the others, and fast. He began to make his way deeper into the heart of the training area. At least, he thought it was deeper in. The crash had turned him around, and it was already easy enough to get lost in this maze. The deeper he went into the maze, the quieter it got. He realized he was shaking. His mind kept drifting back to the USJ incident. He steeled himself and pushed forward, sticky balls at the ready. He could hear voices out in the distance. It was his classmates. He broke into a run towards the sound when he tripped over something, falling face first into the ground below him. As he stumbled to his feet, he felt a rush of wind behind him. He turned, but nothing was there. He had to get out of there. He stood and began to walk back in the direction of his friends when he bumped into something. Something big. A scream permeated the air, reaching Izuku's ears. He immediately recognized it as Mineta. Over there, he said, pointing in the scream's direction. Izuku and his classmates ran as quickly as they could, finally reaching Mineta, only to find him tied up and hanging from one of the pipes above him. He's crazy, shouted Mineta, terrified. He's freaking crazy. Izuku and the others began detaching Mineta from the pipe when they heard All Might's voice over the speaker system. Mineta, you're out. Report back to the starting area. Which way did he go? Asked Takoyami. I don't know, said Mineta. I barely saw him. Izuku pulled up his detective vision and his cowl, attempting to search the area for clues. As soon as he did, the connection went fuzzy and blacked out. Damn it, said Izuku. He's jamming my detective vision. I'm not able to see where he went. So what do we do, Deku? Said Uraraka. I need to think, said Izuku. He looked over the surrounding area. Batman was very good at disappearing, mostly without a trace. However, this was an espionage exam, and Batman was testing them, especially Izuku. He pulled up his gauntlet computer. Batman was jamming every available frequency. He wasn't able to connect to the Bat computer, and thus his detective vision was useless. He had to think of a way to bypass the jammer, or find another frequency that wasn't in use. They heard a noise off in the distance, shouting, clangs and banging on the metal structures around them, even a few explosions. The sound of clashing. Batman had engaged the other students, and Izuku knew they weren't going to last long. All Might came onto the speaker system again, checking off one by one the students who had been captured. Ashido, Aoyama, Yaoyorozu, Asui, even Ida. They were falling fast. Izuku felt his annoyance grow as All Might continued to name them off. That's it. Izuku pulled up the radio frequency tuner on his gauntlet computer. If he could just get the right frequency. Got it, he said excitedly. All Might's loud voice was projected into the speakers in his cowl. By hacking into the speaker system frequency, he was able to listen in on All Might as he blabbed to the students who made their way back to the conference room after getting taken out by Batman. Which meant Izuku now had Batman's location. I know where he is, said Izuku, but we can't just take him head on. We need a plan. You know him best, Midoriya, said Takoyami. What do we do? Izuku thought a moment. Bruce had taught him everything he knew, and there wasn't a thing about Izuku that he didn't know. But perhaps that was what he could use to his advantage. Okay, he said. Here's what we need to do. Todoroki could see why Midoriya was so strong. The Batman had gotten the drop on them, already taking down several of their students. He went for Ida first, who had the communications device, preventing him from contacting Midoriya. He then made short work of several of the other students, capturing them with a swift resolve that rivaled his father. The area they were in was cramped, with several pipes and metal hardware surrounding them. It was difficult for Todoroki to get a good shot at their opponent, even with both his quirks. It didn't help that the Batman was fast, very fast. It was all he could do to keep him at a distance while protecting the rest of the team that had yet to be captured. But he knew he couldn't hold off the assault for long. "We need a plan," shouted Todoroki. "I got this," said Kaminari, rushing forward. "No, don't," shouted Todoroki, but it was too late to stop him. He lunged towards the Batman, charging his indiscriminate discharge 2,000,000 volts, but as he approached, Batman simply reached out and grabbed onto him, seemingly absorbing the volts into his gauntlets, then grabbed onto one of the protruding pipes next to him, and the electric current shot throughout the area around them, shocking the students. After a few seconds, Kaminari faltered, his energy spent, giggling stupidly as a side effect from his electricity. Batman seized his chance and cuffed Kaminari and placed him to the side. The rest of the students were weakened by Kaminari's attack. Tsuyu launched her tongue forward and tried to entrap Batman, but he deftly dodged it, causing it to stick on the wall behind him. While briefly immobilized, he pulled a small capsule from his utility belt and threw it at her feet, which exploded into a mass of sticky ooze, trapping her. It was Gyro's turn to act now, moving forward and plugging her earphone jacks into her boot, attempting to use her sound blast. But Batman was one step ahead of her, throwing another capsule towards her feet, which exploded and encased her boots up to the knee in thick ice, preventing the escape of sound. Batman bounded over her in Todoroki's fire blast, placing Gyro in cuffs while in midair. She was out now as well, and their numbers continued to dwindle. "He's mowing us down," shouted Sato. "Where is everyone else?" "Get behind me," said Todoroki. Sato complied, and Todoroki threw up a wall of ice between himself and what was left of the group. "Let's see you dodge this," he said, launching a huge blast of fire towards Batman. The blast completely engulfed him, and he disappeared beneath the flame. "Geez, Todoroki, you don't have to kill him," shouted Ajiro. But Todoroki wasn't trying to kill him. After seeing Midoriya in battle, he had a pretty good idea of how Batman's armor worked. He hoped that he was able to somehow weaken the armor, or at least slow him down long enough for one of them to use their capture tape. "When I give the signal," said Todoroki, "rush in and use the." He stopped dead in mid-sentence. Batman had made it through the fire unscathed. He used his cape to shield himself from the brunt of the blast, and his armor had protected him from the rest of it. "Impossible," said Todoroki. Batman wasted no time, rushing forward at incredible speed. Todoroki threw up a wall between them, trying to buy them some time to escape. Todoroki could see the bat-shaped silhouette pull something from his belt, and he heard what sounded like a can of spray paint against the wall. Realization dawned on Todoroki. "Get down," he shouted. The wall of ice exploded, forcing the students backwards in the blast. Batman walked through the open hole in the ice wall, and Ajiro rushed forward, trying to strike Batman, who dodged and parried his attacks effortlessly, grabbing him by the tail and throwing him to the ground, taking his chance to cuff him while the wind was knocked out of him. He continued to make his way towards the rest of the students when he paused and reached out to his side, grabbing onto seemingly nothing. Todoroki then realized that he was holding onto Hagakura's arm, after she had tried to sneak up on him. "How did you see me?" she said indignantly. "You may be invisible, but your body heat isn't," Batman replied, placing cuffs on her. "Damn," Todoroki thought, looking around. There was still no sign of Midoriya anywhere. They were losing badly. They needed him. As Batman continued to advance, Todoroki realized that it was only he and Sato left. They stood and readied themselves to fight, but they both knew that it was useless. Batman was as unstoppable as his reputation preceded. "Enough." Batman stopped, turning at the sound behind him. There stood Izukumidoriya, squaring off against his mentor, alone. "Your fight's with me, Batman," said Izuku. "Then shut up and fight," Batman shot back. Izuku wasted no time, leaping forward into a flurry of punches and kicks. Batman matched him blow for blow, both parrying and attacking each other with blinding speed. Todoroki and Sato stared in awe at the skirmish. It was like the Batman was fighting his own shadow. Izuku leaped into a spinning kick towards Batman's head, who parried it effortlessly, grabbing him and throwing him into the wall beside them. Midoriya leapt back to his feet in an instant, pressing his attack. But Batman was too strong. He continued to counter Izuku's attacks, which were starting to lose their steam. "You know a forward-facing attack is useless," said Batman. "You know you can't win, which means you're not trying to win." Batman looked around, detecting several other signatures surrounding him. Playing the distraction, he said, "Not bad." "Now," shouted Izuku. Shoji, Uraraka, Kirishima, Takoyami, and Shiro all leapt out of their hiding places, advancing on Batman. Shoji and Kirishima began their assault directly on Batman, who was dodging and parrying their attacks. Uraraka began throwing punches, and attempted to get in a good shot to use her quirk on him, but he bounded over her, pushing her into Shoji and Kirishima. Takoyami stepped forward and called forth Dark Shadow. "I've always dreamed of meeting you," he said. I never thought I would get the chance to fight you. He ordered Dark Shadow forward, and surprisingly was able to land a hit on Batman, sending him backwards. He recovered quickly, throwing a batarang towards Dark Shadow, which exploded in a blinding light. This caused Dark Shadow to shriek and it retreated back to its master. Zero stepped in and threw the cellophane from his arms towards Batman, trying to ensnare him. Batman grabbed onto the tape and pulled Zero forward into a clothesline. Batman then used his own cellophane to capture him. Shoji, Uraraka and Kirishima recovered and began their attack again, with Izuku, Sato and Todoroki joining them. They were backing Batman against a corner, who continued to dodge and block their assaults. "We're doing it," said Sato. "We got him on the ropes." But Izuku knew better. Batman was rarely backed into a corner without a way out. He reached into his belt and pulled out a capsule, throwing it to the ground. A bright light enveloped them, and the students all yelled as they tried to shield their eyes from the flash. When their eyes adjusted, Batman was gone. "Where'd he go?" said Kirishima. "Don't worry," Todoroki said. "We'll find." "Time's up." The booming voice of All Might projected over the speakers. "The match was over." "Man, we lost," said Sato. "So many of us were taken captive," said Todoroki. "The odds were stacked against us from the beginning." "Don't be so sure." They all jumped at the deep voice behind them. Batman had returned. "You all performed adequately," he said. "It's not every day that someone gets the better of me." He lifted his arm, showing the students the capture tape that was wrapped around it. Everyone turned to Izuku, who no longer had his capture tape. They all paused for a minute, then burst into cheers at their victory. "Looks like your plan worked, Midoriya," said Batman, walking away. "They all seem to really trust you." "Not bad." Izuku and his classmates were finishing up in the locker rooms, changing back into their school uniforms. They had all had a tough day of training, and the espionage training they just went through was particularly tough. The boys around him were still talking excitedly about it. "I still can't believe we fought Batman," said Kirishima. "That was the coolest thing ever." "He is every bit as good as his reputation makes him out to be," said Tokoyami. "It was a true honor seeing him in action." "Is that the kind of training you went through, Midoriya?" asked Sato. "More or less," said Izuku. The truth was that Batman went easy on them, but he didn't have the heart to tell them. "It was terrifying," said Minda, still shaking from his encounter. "Are you sure the dude doesn't have a quirk?" said Sato. "How strong he was, how fast he was moving. We could barely keep up with him. He was like a total ninja out there. That's why he's the top hero in America," said Tokoyami. "I thought Superman was the top hero in America," said Kaminari. "On paper, yes," said Tokoyami. "But Batman is considered to be the most feared in the criminal underworld, even above Superman." "That's freaky," said Kirishima. Izuku finished changing, ready to make his journey home. He was tired and sore, and had a lot of studying to do. When he exited the locker room, he stopped in surprise to see that Bruce was waiting for him, and he was accompanied by All Might. "Midoriya," said Bruce, "we need to talk." "What's this about, Bruce?" said Izuku. Today was full of surprises for him. He had never seen All Might and Bruce in the same room before, much less having Bruce assist with his class. He still wasn't entirely sure why Bruce had participated in the training to begin with. "There's a reason behind my actions in class today," said Bruce, as if reading his mind. "You demonstrated considerable strength and growth in your fight with the hero killer. I wanted to see that for myself, and you didn't disappoint." "It's true," said All Might. "You performed well today." Izuku felt a sense of pride at All Might's words rise in his chest, despite the bitterness he felt. He was still on uneasy ground with the pro hero after what happened at the sports festival. "It's important that we take your training to the next step," said Bruce. "What do you mean?" said Izuku. "Things are happening, Izuku," said Bruce. "The events at the USJ and Hosu City are just the beginning. For better or worse, you're involved now, and you need to be ready." "Ready for what?" asked Izuku. "In order to tell you that, there's something you have to know first," said Bruce, turning to All Might. "About the connection between the League of Villains and All Might." "Connection?" said Izuku, surprised. "I'm afraid so," said All Might. "And to properly tell you the story, you need to know about my quirk." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Not many people know about my quirk," he continued. "It is a closely guarded secret that I have worked hard to keep, just that, secret. Many people just assume it is super strength. When asked about it in interviews, I try to dodge the question as best I can. The truth is, I wasn't born with this quirk." "What?" said Izuku, standing up. "Just hear him out," said Bruce. Izuku sat back down. "It's true," said All Might, lifted his hand, which began to glow a rainbow of different colors. "I was given this power at a young age, and it was passed down to my predecessor and her predecessor before her. With each wielder, the power is cultivated and grows stronger until it is passed on to the next wielder. Its true name, One for All. You remember what I told you about quirks, said Bruce. Izuku nodded, recounting their conversation about Lex Luthor, or rather, a version of him, sending the alien brainiacs exobites back in time, causing humanity to develop quirks. That's where my quirk comes in, said All Might. Around the time Luthor introduced the exobites. You know about Luthor and Brainiac, said Izuku, surprised. He was training in America at the time, and was part of the task force that helped to take down Brainiac, said Bruce. My quirk, All Might continued, is derived from another quirk, a very old and powerful quirk that allowed the user to take quirks from others. The user could then keep and use the quirk as his own, and even give it to others. When people started developing quirks due to the exobites, society didn't quite know how to deal with the increased rate of superpowered individuals. Suddenly it was impossible to determine what it meant to be normal. Laws and human rights were hotly debated. Civilization's progress stalled and society decayed, just like Luthor said it would. But during the chaotic change, there was one person that managed to rally a bunch of people together. He went by the name of his power, All for One. He developed the ability to steal quirks from others, Bruce said. And with his overwhelming abilities he was able to spread his influence across the country. He manipulated people to serve his purpose and committed evil acts with little resistance. In a blink of an eye, he became the leader of villains and ruled over Japan. Izuku remembered reading about this online, but it was always assumed to be just a legend. It was never talked about in their history books or through any reputable source. If it wasn't coming from Bruce and All Might, he would scarcely believe it. It's the kind of shameful history that people would rather forget about, said All Might. When a person gains true power, they enjoy showing it off. He made people trust him, submit to his will by altering their abilities. Bruce pulled out a small holodisc and pulled up the projection of a man sitting in a chair. He wasn't moving, a vacant and ghastly look etched on his face. There were some people who couldn't bear the weight of the quirks they were given, said Bruce. They became like mindless living dolls, incapable of speaking or thinking for themselves, just like the Namu. Are you saying? Izuku began, hardly wanting to hear the answer. We believe so, Izuku, said Bruce. All for One is the true leader behind the League of Villains. But isn't he long dead by this point? Said Izuku. One who steals quirks has no limits, said All Might. You should know by now that anything is possible. There are even quirks that halt aging. He probably has something like that, but we can't know for sure. But how did One for All derive from this evil person? Said Izuku. It's an ironic part of life, but justice so often spawns from evil, said Bruce. All for One had a quirkless brother, who was young and sickly but had a strong sense of justice, and vehemently opposed his brother's deeds. Eventually, All for One gave his brother a quirk, one that allowed him to stockpile his power. Most likely it was less of a gift and more of a means to make him submit. But what All for One didn't know is that his brother wasn't actually quirkless. He had a quirk that allowed him to transfer his quirk others. A seemingly useless quirk, so it is understandable how it went undetected. But it allowed him to pass on the stockpile quirk given to him by his brother. Because of his influence and the sheer difference in their power, the younger brother passed on his quirk to new generations. With each user, the quirk grows stronger, until one day it would be strong enough to stop his older brother. Realization dawned on Izuku. Your fight 5 years ago, he said. That's right, said All Might. I managed to defeat All for One, or so I thought. He added bitterly. The battle came at a heavy price, and now it seems that he has survived and is leading the League of Villains. Why are you telling me this? Asked Izuku. What does this have to do with me? You and Tamura Shigaraki are now bound as much as All for One and All Might are, said Bruce. I'm sorry, Izuku, but it is an inevitability of the mission. You are no longer just a pebble in his path, you are his target. Izuku swallowed. So that was it. Shigaraki wanted him dead. He supposed he shouldn't be surprised, considering their last meeting at the USJ. But it still filled Izuku with a sense of fear, knowing that somewhere out there was someone who was seeking his destruction. We won't let anything happen to you, young Midoriya, said All Might. I promise you that. So now you care what happens to me? Izuku snapped. All Might recoiled slightly. I've always cared, young Midoriya, he said quietly. But I see now that what I said to you on that rooftop was wrong. In fact, I see now more than ever that you are worthy. Worthy? Izuku scoffed. Of what? Of inheriting my quirk, said All Might. Izuku fell silent, speechless. He looked back and forth from All Might to Bruce, whose face remained passive. You want me to inherit your quirk, said Izuku finally. Yes, said All Might. My body is failing, and my power along with it. Someone must succeed me as the new symbol of peace. I see now that you are the correct choice. I hope you can forgive this old man for not seeing it sooner. Will you accept this responsibility and become the next holder of One for All? Izuku hesitated. This was something that he dreamed of every day since he was a child. Every day he hoped and prayed for a miracle that would bring him his power, true power. Every time Kaken hurt him, every time he was called weak and pathetic for not having powers, for being different, this would all come to an end, and he would finally know what it was like to experience true power. No, said Izuku. All Might stared in surprise. Are you sure, Midoriya? He said. Isn't this what you always wanted? It is, he said. Or at least, it used to be. But I don't need it. He looked up at All Might fiercely. You may think I'm worthy now, but you're wrong. I've always been worthy. Shigaraki may come after me. All for One himself may come after me. They are welcome to try. I'll be ready for them. He stood and began to walk out the door. Think about this, young Midoriya, said All Might. Are you sure this is what you want? Izuku nodded. I already have a power, All Might, he said. I never give up. He closed the door and left without another word. All Might sank back down into his chair and heaved a great sigh. Well, that's it then, he said sadly. My search for a successor continues, and I'm running out of time. Bruce said nothing, standing up and suddenly reaching over and yanking a strand of hair from All Might's head. Oh, what the hell, Bruce, said All Might indignantly. For safekeeping, Bruce replied, following Midoriya out the door, leaving the bewildered All Might behind. Izuku was lying awake in bed. It was fast approaching 3 a.m. and his mind was racing from what Bruce and All Might had told him. All for one, one for all, it was all so much to take in. He was barely a few months into his training at UA and he already made several enemies. An assassin with taste for blood, a maniac with a penchant for hands, and one of the most dangerous criminal masterminds in all of Japanese history. He knew that this was all part of being a hero, but he didn't expect to make such dangerous adversaries so quickly. He was being dragged into a conspiracy that was not his business. More and more connections were made between him and All Might, but now these connections put his life at risk, and perhaps those he cared about. He wanted to be brave, but the truth was the fear continued to creep into his heart. He wished he had never met All Might on that rooftop, but deep down he knew that if he hadn't, then it was possible that he would have never met Bruce, and he never would have come close to achieving his dreams. He turned over in his bed onto his side. His mind drifted back to the video he watched of Jason Todd's murder. Would they be burying him next? Was this the ultimate destiny of those who came under the House of Batman? Perhaps this was the inevitability of every hero, as evident with the sickly and dying All Might. Eventually, no matter how fast you tried to run, death would eventually catch up to you. He thought of Kaken. The relationship between them was strange. Kaken seemed to only keep Izuku around so that he would have someone to inflict his wrath and frustrations upon. Many had questioned him as to why he continued to follow Kaken despite such abuse. In fact, he often asked himself that. Perhaps that was just his fate, to be a lightning rod for punishment. But the truth was, it was his admiration for Kaken that kept him there. He was amazing, confident and competent in everything he did. Everything he was Izuku wanted to be. But even with all his accomplishments, it was still not enough to save him. Even with all his training, would he be strong enough to face the challenges before him? Izuku felt a ping from his phone. It was a text message from Bruce. Izuku was curious. Bruce was usually up at this hour, but he rarely contacted Izuku. The message puzzled him at first, as it consisted of only 4 words. Warehouse, now, found him. Izuku stared at the message for a full minute before realization finally dawned on him. He sprang up out of bed and threw his clothes on, grabbed his utility belt and escaped out the window of his room. Bruce had done it. He had found the sludge villain. The elevator door opened, and Izuku stepped into the warehouse. On most nights, the warehouse was quiet. Bruce and Alfred were rarely there, spending most of their time in Gotham. Izuku came here mostly alone to train. On occasion, Alfred would communicate with him through the Bat computer just to check up on him. But tonight, the warehouse was bustling. Batman and Nightwing were sitting together at the conference table, talking and looking over files and a holographic projection of what looked to be a map. Izuku was surprised to see someone else there as well, the woman in the wheelchair, the one who was with Bruce, Dick and Alfred at the sports festival. She was hard at work on the Bat computer with what looked like several cyber-sniffing and hacking programs. Master Midoriya, welcome, said a familiar voice. Alfred had appeared at his side, offering him a cup of tea. At his words, the rest of the team looked up from their work towards Izuku. Nightwing sprang from his chair immediately and went to greet Izuku, wringing his hand. Good to see you again, kid, he said. Welcome to the party. Hey, Barb. He called over to the woman in the wheelchair. Come meet the new kid. Nice to meet you, Izuku, she said, shaking his hand. My name's Barbara Gordon. It's nice to meet you, said Izuku. You're a pro hero too. She's Batgirl, kid, said Nightwing. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise. Batgirl had disappeared from the hero community several years ago. Now, it seemed to make a bit more sense as to why. But he didn't dare ask why she was now wheelchair-bound. Well, I used to be, said Barbara. These days I try to keep these guys out of trouble, serving as their eyes and ears. You can call me Oracle. I don't know how we got along without her, really, said Nightwing. She's more use now than she ever was as Batgirl. You're just jealous because you were always in my shadow, said Barbara, smacking Nightwing lightly on the shoulder, who chuckled. Izuku was enjoying their discourse, but his smile quickly faded when his eyes fell on the projection on the conference table. The map had changed to a different image, one with a large, greenish-brown mass of sludge, with large yellow eyes and jagged rounded teeth protruding into a grotesque smile. Izuku clenched his teeth. It was a face he hadn't seen in over a year, and it still chilled him to his core. Where is he? Said Izuku. An abandoned Toei subway station in Tokyo, said Batman. He has been scurrying in and out of sewer systems for months, which is why he has been so hard to track. How did you find him? Asked Izuku. The money he took from the drug lord, said Nightwing. The bills were unmarked, but a significant amount was laced with traces of a drug compound that matched with his unique blend. We were able to isolate the compound and triangulate his location based on local shops where the money was used, said Batman. When I last faced him, he escaped into an open sewer grate. By doing a deep scan of the sewer systems, we found they connected with the old subway station. We then tested the water near the system for his genetic signature and cross-referenced it with the local criminal database. Batman pulled up the database as he spoke, revealing a positive match. No mistake, he's there. How has he been able to spend the money if there's a manhunt after him? Said Izuku. Oracle wheeled towards the projection of the conference table. This may be a little hard to see, she said, pulling up another screen on the projection. It was several missing person reports, some of them kids no older than Izuku. It was another way we were able to find him. Every one of these people disappeared in Tokyo, around secluded spots. We even were able to get a visual glimpse of one of them, due to a security camera. She pulled up the security footage, showing a man in his early 20s being enveloped by the sludge monster. Once he stopped struggling, the monster opened the man's mouth and entered into his body. After a moment or so, the villain had simply walked away with his new disguise. Izuku was silent, feeling his stomach drop at the sight. His mind flashed with images of the last time he saw the sludge villain. This was exactly what the villain had in mind when he had attacked Izuku. His encounter couldn't have lasted more than 10 seconds, but it felt like the longest in his life. No matter how hard he struggled, the fingers tore and slipped through the sludge uselessly. He had never been so scared as he felt his lungs burn from lack of oxygen, everything around him going black. You okay, kid? Said Nightwing, snapping Izuku back to reality. You don't have to do this. Bruce and I can handle him. No, said Izuku. I'm ready. This monster's been free long enough and has cost too many lives as it is. He needs to be stopped. Batman nodded approvingly, pressing a button on the console next to him. The floor opened adjacent to them, and a large cylinder container rose from the opening. Once it finished, the side of the cylinder opened to reveal Izuku's hero costume. Fresh upgrades, said Batman. Get suited up. We're leaving. Izuku's stomach churned. He, Batman, and Nightwing were traveling through the sewer system in Tokyo. They had taken the Batwing to their location, and had been traveling through the sewers for the last 20 minutes, following the tracker Batman was using. In the back of Izuku's mind, he realized that this was the first time that he had been on a real mission with Batman. He would have normally been excited, but that was the last thing on his mind. When the USJ was attacked and he fought with the hero killer, he didn't have time to be scared. He just had time to act. But there was plenty of time to feel fear in this situation, as he prepared to run headlong into battle with a creature that almost killed him a year ago. How you holding up, kid? Said Nightwing. Fine, Izuku lied. We're with you, Izuku, said Oracle over the comm system. Lighten up, Oracle. This kid took down one of Ra's flunkies nearly single-handedly, said Nightwing. This chump has no chance. Lighten up, said Oracle. How about showing a little decorum over the situation? Nightwing. Who? Me. I practically invented decorum, said Nightwing. I'm just saying the kid's a natural. Everyone be quiet, said Batman. The station is just ahead. They traveled in silence for a few minutes before reaching an old brick wall, which looked to have been knocked down some time ago. Beyond it, Izuku was amazed to see a vast underground station. It was in a state of extreme disrepair, with an old subway car sitting solely on the track. Everything looked to have been abandoned decades ago, but despite this, there were several new things strewn about. Old bottles and alcohol cans strewn about carelessly, as well as several empty packages and cans of food. There was a large empty vat that looked to hold chemicals near the old subway car, which Izuku assumed where the villain slept. Stacks and stacks of the stolen money were piled against the walls and in several open crates filled with various different drugs and narcotics. But what Izuku saw next disgusted him the most. Slumped carelessly in a corner of the subway were the bodies of the missing persons, cast aside like pieces of a macabre wardrobe. Izuku did a head count, and one of them was missing. "He's not here," said Izuku, "and one of the bodies is missing. Probably out shopping," said Nightwing facetiously. "He could be back any minute," said Batman. "Remember the plan. Get into position and attack on my signal." He took his grapple gun from his belt and launched it upward, getting a vantage point in the rafters above. Izuku and Nightwing followed suit. The fact that the villain was out meant they had a unique opportunity to get the drop on him. This may be their only chance to stop him, and Izuku dared not waste it. Hours passed, and Izuku began to wonder if the villain would return. Izuku heard his comm system chime in. "He's back," he heard Oracle say gravely. The body of the last missing person lumbered into the station, carrying a small box. It moved like a grotesque puppet on a string. He looked around for a minute, and when he was satisfied he was alone, the mouth of the missing person opened and spewed forth a greenish-brown sludge. Izuku stifled a gag, disgusted by the sight. After a minute, the body crumpled into a heap, and the sludge took shape into a form Izuku recognized all too well. The creature cackled as he opened the small box he was carrying, revealing to be a cache of jewels and gems. Out shopping was right, Izuku thought. His anger boiled at the sight of the creature. How callously he killed these people and subjected their memory to the humiliation of wearing them as meat suits. He felt his hatred grow more and more for this creature. He shook his head. He had to steel himself. He couldn't let his emotions overtake him. He looked over at Batman and Nightwing, who were taking items out of their utility belts, ice capsules. Izuku did the same. Their plan was to encase him in ice as quickly as possible to prevent him from escaping. He was slippery and cunning, and they knew they wouldn't get another chance like this. "Now!" shouted Batman. They all jumped from the rafters, throwing the ice capsules towards their quarry. The capsules struck their target and immediately exploded into ice, creeping quickly to encapsulate the monster. "What the hell?" shouted the sludge monster, breaking off from the piece of himself already encased in ice. He slithered around the station, looking for an escape, but Batman was way ahead of him, sealing the only exit with another ice capsule. "There's nowhere to run," said Batman. "You heroes just made the biggest mistake of your life," screamed the sludge villain, lunging for Batman. He swiftly dodged the attack, simultaneously throwing another ice capsule at the creature. The sludge villain shrieked and separated itself from the ice. This time, Nightwing advanced on him, followed closely by Izuku. They threw their capsules at the villain, but this time he was prepared, slithering out of the way. It then formed an appendage and thrust it towards Izuku and Nightwing, both bounding over it before it struck them. Nightwing stuck his electrified tonfa into the villain, which shrieked as the electric charge permeated throughout its body. The villain recovered from the shock and lunged towards Nightwing, this time managing to entrap him in its sludge. "Nightwing!" shouted Izuku in horror. But Nightwing wasn't finished yet. The creature shrieked again as more electricity shot throughout his body, releasing his captive. Nightwing grappled away to safety, throwing another ice capsule at the villain. The ice began to form around it, and once again it separated itself from the ice and redoubled its efforts on Nightwing and Batman. Izuku's mind was calculating as it fought against his mentors. The creature was able to separate itself and seemed to be able to make more of the sludge. If they weren't careful, they would exhaust their ice capsules before they could capture it. Electricity seemed to be a weakness it had, as evident to Nightwing's attacks. Izuku could use that to his advantage, but he had to act quickly while the villain was otherwise distracted. "I'll crush you both," shouted the sludge villain to Nightwing and Batman. He was increasing in size, slamming into the walls of the station. The already precarious station began to crumble under the attacks. Any more strain and they would be buried alive. Nightwing and Batman drew more ice capsules, but were caught off guard as the creature shrieked in immense pain. Immense currents of electricity were passing through the creature, causing his size and density to decrease rapidly. "What is happening to me?" the villain screamed in fear. Izuku stood behind him. He was pressing down on a small device. Batman and Nightwing realized that he was the one sending the electric currents through the creature. "I modified the electric current in this device," said Izuku to the villain. It's causing you to lose your viscosity. In a few minutes, you will be reduced to nothing but a puddle on the ground. He approached the villain, who continued to yell in pain, and removed his cowl. Do you recognize me? The villain didn't answer right away. You, he said finally. You're the brat who got me caught by All Might. His bulbous eyes widened, as if in sudden realization. You're the one who took down the hero killer. He added fearfully. You murdered my friend, said Katsuki Bakugou. You murdered him in cold blood to save your own skin. So what? Said the villain desperately. Is this about revenge? You don't have to do this. I have money. The monster shrieked again as Izuku increased the voltage. Nightwing began to step forward, but Batman stopped him. Please, the villain continued pleadingly. I'll do whatever you want, I'll go wherever you want. You'll never see me again. I'll give you anything. Izuku took a capsule from his utility belt and dropped it into the screaming mess before him. In an instant, ice began to form again around the villain. His screams finally nullified as he was encased in his frozen prison. I want justice, said Izuku. Izuku, Batman, and Nightwing stood on the rooftop of a building, overlooking a crowd of police officers hauling the frozen sludge villain into custody. They had put in an anonymous tip and had been there within minutes of the end of the battle, but Izuku and his mentors had already left the scene. I'm proud of you, kid, said Nightwing, placing a hand on his shoulder. You may well be suited for this business after all. How do you feel? Asked Batman. In truth, Izuku wasn't sure. As the police hauled away the object of his hatred for the past year, he felt a sense of completion that he never had experienced before. It wasn't a satisfied feeling or a happy feeling. Rather, it was a feeling of acknowledgement. Despite everything that he had been through the past year, the biggest obstacle that he was facing was not an external one. Rather, it was within himself. There was always that sense of doubt, that nagging feeling that he was only playing hero, a dangerous game of pretend. There was always that feeling that because of the circumstances of his birth, he would never truly be a hero. But today, that feeling was taken away, along with the villain who had killed his friend. He finally believed it. He could be a hero. I feel great, said Izuku. You sure you don't want to go down there? Said Nightwing. I'm sure they'll want to interview the hero who took him down. No, said Izuku, turning to walk away. I've gotten enough fame and praise lately. Let's get out of here. It's like looking at a smaller version of you, said Nightwing to Batman as Izuku walked away. He couldn't be sure, but Nightwing thought he saw a small smile cross Batman's face. Final exams. All Might sank onto the couch in his home, exhausted from the day's work. Being a teacher was more tiring than he could have imagined. Gran Torino made it look so easy when he was his homeroom teacher. All Might couldn't help but find it a little amusing, considering he was able to bring peace to an entire society, but was a complete novice at teaching. He sipped from his freshly brewed tea and turned on the television set, ready to relax for the night. The television sprang to life onto a well-dressed anchor on a news program. Our top story tonight, the anchor said. The creature that the media has dubbed the elusive sludge villain, who was responsible for the deaths and disappearances of several people across several cities, has finally been brought to justice. All Might spit his tea out in surprise, coughing violently. The villain had eluded capture for over a year, continued the anchor, before finally being apprehended by police due to an anonymous tip received by police. When the police arrived, the creature was encased in a thick layer of ice, but has refused to cooperate with police, so there is no indication of who took down this villain. The only lead we have is this strange device found at the site. The image on the television cut to a small, broken metal shard, which looked oddly like a bat. He didn't recognize it at first, but after a moment, All Might was sure of it. It was a broken batarang. They did it, said All Might, laughing. They really did it. Among various crates of drugs and assorted contraband, the bodies of several missing persons were discovered as well, said the anchor. No more information has been put forth on the discoveries of the missing persons, and their families were not available for comment. However, we were able to get in touch with Masaru and Mitsuki Bakugou, the first victim of the villain who was killed over a year ago, sparking the start of this manhunt. The program then began presenting information on the Bakugou family, showing various pictures of the young man who was murdered. All Might remembered that day vividly, and continued to relive it since it happened. It had been a source of great shame to him, representing a failure he had not felt since he had watched his master, Nana Shimura, die at the hands of All for One. Since that day, he vowed he would never fail to save someone in need. And until that day, he had kept that promise. The report cut to an interview with the parents. We are relieved and happy to hear that our son's murderer has finally been brought to justice, said Mitsuki Bakugou, the boy's mother. She looked to All Might like a strong, powerful woman. Tears began to well in her eyes, something that he was sure was completely foreign to her. She turned away from the reporter and towards the camera. For the hero who brought down this monster, I understand your desire to remain anonymous. But from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Thank you so much. All Might turned off the television, leaning back on his couch. Well done, young Midoriya, he said quietly. And wherever you are in this universe, young Bakugou, I hope you realize what a great friend you have. Izuku's life had returned to normal after the events with the sludge villain. He had dreamed about bringing this creature to justice for over a year, and now that it has happened, he felt as if his steps were lighter now, like a heavy weight was removed from his shoulders. He had seen the news report with Kaken's family, and couldn't express the feeling in his heart when Mrs. Bakugou expressed her thanks. He felt now his friend could finally rest in peace. However, Izuku was forced to focus his attention back to his schoolwork. Term finals were rapidly approaching. Not only did they have to be concerned about the written exam, but they had to train extensively to prepare for the practical part of the exam, which was still a mystery to them. Izuku's class had begun to split up into different study groups. Yaoyorozu had scored first in midterm exams, so most of them flocked to her for tutelage for the written material. But to Izuku's surprise, nearly everyone seemed to approach him about training for the practical. "You want me to train you?" Izuku said, stunned. In truth, he had planned to study alone and spend most of his training at the warehouse. He had a few new simulations of his own design that he wanted to test, and there was no way that Bruce would let any of them anywhere near there just because they were his friends. "Yeah, Midoriya," said Kirishima, "you're the most prepared out of all of us for this kind of thing." "I agree," said Tokoyami. "You faced off with the leader of the League of Villains at the USJ, took second place in the sports festival, came up with a winning strategy against the Batman during our last training exercise, and of course, your most impressive feat, you brought down the hero killer." Izuku was silent, shooting a quick glance towards Ida and Todoroki. He was still uncomfortable about getting credit for his involvement with the hero killer. Todoroki was his usual passive self, but Ida, however, was undeterred. "He's right, Midoriya," said Ida. "I think we could all benefit from your expertise when it comes to the practical exam. As class rep, I have high hopes that we'll make you proud." Izuku scratched his nose absently. He supposed they made good points, but he still didn't consider himself much of a leader, let alone a teacher. "All right," he said finally. "I'll do my best." Everyone around him cheered happily. He had a feeling, however, they wouldn't be cheering once they got started. The UA teachers all sat around the U-shaped conference table. It was time once again for the UA Hero Course final exams, and they were hotly debating about what should be included in the practical exam, in light of recent events. With the connection between the hero killer stain and the League of Villains, it's possible criminals everywhere will become much bolder, said Principal Nezu. "It'd be best if we could start preparing for that before it happens," said Snipe. "As a school, we should be taking every precaution. If fights against villains are going to intensify in the future, then having the kids train against robots ain't practical. They have done their part with mitigating complaints about people getting injured during the entrance exam," said Midnight. "But they aren't challenging enough. We can ignore the complaints," said Aizawa. "I understand why you want to change the exam, but to fight against us," said Cementos. "Even with teams of 2, that a good idea." "It seems a bit unfair," agreed 13. "If we went easy on them, we couldn't exactly give them a grade," said Present Mike. "We could take that into consideration and give the students an advantage," said Snipe. "What do you think, Principal?" said Aizawa. "I believe I agree," replied Nezu. "We need to change the exam to reflect the changing times. How do we ensure that students aren't put in life-threatening situations? We must push them so they are as strong as possible." "That makes sense," said Midnight. All the other teachers were in agreement. For the next few minutes, they began to divide up the teams for Class 1A. They all stopped when they reached the odd number out, Izukumidoriya. "He's the only one left, but he doesn't have a team member," said Midnight. "Should we have one of the students go again? It's unlikely they'll have the strength or will to go through another entrance exam, especially since they aren't the ones being graded," said Cementos. "They might not take it as seriously." "What if we do teams of 3 for the last group?" said Present Mike. "Other students may see that as an unfair advantage," said Snipe. "But he can't just take it alone," said Midnight. "Why not?" said Aizawa. "You can't be serious, Aizawa," said All Might. "I am serious," said Aizawa, turning to All Might. "And I am assigning him to fight you, All Might." "What?" the teachers said in unison. "One student against the symbol of peace," said Cementos. "That's ludicrous, he'd never make it." "Have you all forgotten all you have seen this student do?" said Aizawa. "Have you also forgotten that he took down the hero killer? Are you all still doubting his ability despite everything he has done because he's quirkless?" The group went silent. But still, against All Might, muttered Midnight. What do you hope to achieve here, Aizawa? Said All Might. Out of all the students, why pit him against me? I have calculated the probability of success against all the teachers and cross-referenced them based on student ability, said Aizawa. Out of all of them, Midoriya stands the best chance of winning a battle with you. But there's more to it than that, Aizawa added. I also factored in relationships. It's fairly obvious that you seem to have a soft spot for Midoriya, even though he seems to want nothing to do with you. In fact, based on what I have observed about him, he seems to absolutely hate you. I'm hoping that by fighting you the boy will have a unique opportunity to grow past this hang-up, which ultimately hinders his progression. So try to make sure the boy learns something out of this, All Might. All Might swallowed. Aizawa had been paying closer attention than he thought. All Might still held shame and disappointment for his actions regarding Midoriya, and devastation over his refusal to inherit One for All, and he hadn't attempted to speak with Midoriya privately since then. Still, that wasn't enough to deter Aizawa's thinking that All Might had singled Midoriya out among the others of Class 1A. Though he was reluctant to agree to this arrangement by Aizawa, he couldn't help but feel a small twinge of excitement to see just how much stronger Midoriya had become. This is pure, unmitigated hell, shouted Mainta. He and the rest of his classmates were running for their lives. Izuku couldn't blame them. He did the same thing when he first trained against the Horde. Izuku had told Bruce about how his classmates wanted to train with him for the finals, but he wasn't sure exactly what to do to facilitate the training. Bruce had told him that he would take care of it and gave him the address to an empty factory that he had used for his various crime-fighting ventures, and once they had arrived there, Izuku was reminded starkly at how seriously the Batman takes training. They were met by several robotic automatons that Izuku had to fight against during his intense training before enrolling in UA. They weren't that dissimilar from the robots they fought in the entrance exam and the sports festival, except for one major difference: they had the ability to replicate quirks. Batman had acquired this kind of technology after the Justice League first took down the android Amazo, a highly advanced cybernetic android created by the insane Professor Ivo to mimic the abilities of superhumans. Powerful superhumans. These creatures were not as strong as the original Amazo, and they weren't activated to their highest setting, but they were powerful nonetheless. Batman had dubbed these robots the Horde. You actually had to fight these things, said Kirishima, struggling against one of the robots that activated its super strength. Every day for a year, said Izuku, taking down several that had come after him. Your mentor is crazy, Midoriya, said Mainta, trying to escape three that were advancing on him. One of the robots began to attack Kiminari, who had attempted to shock it into submission. The robot had simply stated accessing Martian Manhunter and disappeared from sight. Holy shit, that one just disappeared, shouted Kaminari, frightened. How are we supposed to beat these guys? They can mimic a variety of quirks, but only one at a time, said Izuku. And they have the same weaknesses as any other human. I think I understand, said Ida. We need to work together. Kaminari, behind you, Ida shouted suddenly. The robot who had disappeared had suddenly materialized behind Kaminari, who yelped in fear. Ida ran at full speed towards his friend and leaped into the air above Kaminari and connected a reciproburst against the robot's head, knocking it clean off. Accessing Superman, said a robot, appearing behind Ida. The robot's synthetic eyes began to glow a bright red. A wall of ice erupted between Ida and the robot just as it launched its attack, shielding Ida from the laser blast. Todoroki had protected Ida from the attack, and then used his eyes to encase the robot, restricting its movements. While immobilized, Ashido seized her chance and sprayed a large fountain of acid on the robot's head, melting it beyond recognition. The robot quietly hummed as it powered down. Two robots began to converge on Yaoyorozu, Tsuyu and Uraraka. Accessing Black Canary, the robots said in unison. Their mouth-like openings began to open wider, revealing large speakers inside, and they let out an eruption of sound against their quarry. Gyro stepped forward between the robots and her friends, plugging her earphone jacks into her boots, and met their sonic blast with her own. I can't keep this up for long, shouted Gyro. Someone do something. Tsuyu took the opportunity and wrapped her long tongue around the head of the robot, ripping it from its shoulders. Yaoyorozu used her creation quirk to create a large lance and drove it into the heart of the robot. Behind them, several more robots advanced forward. Accessing Tenya Ida, one of them said. Suddenly, the robot exploded in a burst of speed and kicked the wall of ice, shattering it. It's copying Ida's reciproburst, shouted Zero. What the hell, Midoriya? This was a surprise to Izuku as well, although in all reality he knew it shouldn't have been. The Amazo was a learning robot, and was known to be able to replicate powers on the spot once it had observed them. Since Izuku didn't have a quirk, it could explain why he had never observed it himself. Even if that wasn't the case, Bruce would have most likely added his classmates' quirks in as an extra layer of challenge. Several more robots began to replicate many of his classmates' quirks as they continued their attack: ice and fire, hardened armor, intense speed, electricity, and even acid. "This is a test," said Izuku. "No kidding," shouted Ishido. "No, think about it," said Izuku. "We've fought robots plenty of times, but other than the sports festival and the villain attacks, we haven't had very much experience with fighting against actual quirks. The robots we've faced don't do much other than blunt force attacks. The Horde is designed to test our ability to adapt to an unpredictable environment." "I see," said Takoyami, using Dark Shadow against two of the robots. "Then let us not disappoint. Everyone, let's regroup," shouted Izuku. The class gathered around to the center of the arena. The remaining robots advanced on their position, but this time, Class 1 was ready for them. After another long hour of battle passed, the last robot of the Horde fell to the ground, deactivated. "Finally," shouted Maita. "That was the hardest thing I have ever done," said Kaminari, collapsing to his knees. "I don't think my tummy will ever stop hurting," said Aoyama, lying in the fetal position. Using his quirk, Naval Laser, too much hurt his stomach. "My tail is so bruised up," said Ajiro, wincing as he rubbed his tail gingerly. "It was indeed a challenge," said Takoyami. "Now we know why Midoriya is so strong," said Sato. "Yeah," said Siro. "I don't think I could survive this kind of training every day." "You'd be surprised what you can survive when you have no other options," said Izuku. "I thought UA robots were tough," said Uraraka. "But these robots make them seem like toys." "I still don't know what Batman is playing at," said Maita crossly, "sending these monster robots after us like that. It does seem like overkill," said Yaoyorozu. "UA robots are bad enough, but this was on a completely different level." Izuku remembered that Yaoyorozu was let in on recommendation, so she didn't have to take the entrance exam. Fighting robots is still foreign to her. "You rarely have the luxury of on-level pacing when you're in the field," said a voice behind them. They all jumped to see the tall, dark form of Batman standing over them. "The USJ attack, your internships, these were barely a taste of what dangers wait for you out there." "Have you been watching us, sir?" said Takoyami. "I have," said Batman. "And you all performed adequately. You are moving past fighting prowess and quirk power. Now you are ready to think strategically, learning to identify quirks and make split-second decisions on how to counter them." "But sir," said Yaoyorozu, "the villains we fight won't have the ability to replicate this many quirks, will they?" "Maybe, maybe not," said Batman. "But many times, you only a few seconds to discern an enemy's ability. Preparation has been known to separate you from those who are successful in battle and those who are dead." Maita let out a small squeak of fear at this. "Regardless," Batman continued, "it is crucial for you to learn to fight against and adapt your strategy against powerful quirks, especially now that your term finals are upon you." "What does that mean?" said Kirishima. Batman didn't answer, turning and walking away. "I hope you enjoyed yourselves today," he said. "And if you think you can handle it, come back tomorrow." A few of Izuku's classmates did come back to train with him, but not many. The rest of his classmates decided to focus on their own training methods, not feeling cut out for the Batman program as they called it. They had also poured themselves into their studies as they prepared for the written exam. Alfred had organized a study session for Izuku, inviting several of his friends along with him. He had arrived at Izuku's apartment in his signature Rolls-Royce, carrying Uraraka, Ida, Kirishima, Tsuyu and Takoyami with them, all who had chosen to stay and train with Izuku, and taken them back to the factory where they fought the robots, waiting on them and providing them with ample refreshments while they studied. Izuku had noticed something odd while at school recently. All Might seemed to be avoiding him. Usually, he would go out of his way to try and greet or talk to Izuku, but lately whenever Izuku saw him in the hall or passed him, he would either change course to go down a different hall, or awkwardly shoot him a small hello before continuing on his way. Izuku found it strange, but he wasn't too concerned. After their last conversation, he assumed it was only natural that things would be awkward between them. Refusing One for All must have been the hardest thing that he had done, but Izuku had his reasons for doing it, and tried to push it out of his mind. He had more important things to worry about. Soon, the exam days were upon them. The written exam took 3 days to get through. Izuku didn't find it too difficult, all things considered. He placed in the top 5 in his class during midterms. He, like the rest of his class, were more concerned about the practical exams. They were to be taken at an off-site arena and placed in situations where they would be required to use all they learned during the year to achieve a passing grade. Soon the practical exam was upon them, and Izuku and his classmates stepped off the bus at the UA Exam Arena Center Plaza. It was a facility that they hadn't been to before and didn't know what to expect inside. They were all suited up from head to toe in their hero costumes, ready for whatever awaited them. The UA teachers were all waiting for them as they stepped outside the bus. "Now then," said Aizawa unceremoniously, "let's begin the last test. Remember, it's possible to fail this final. If you want to go to camp, don't make any stupid mistakes." "Why are all the teachers here?" Gyro whispered. "I suspect that you all have gathered information on the exam and have some sort of idea about what to expect during this exam," said Aizawa. "We're going to be fighting robots," said Kaminari excitedly. He and Eishido began an impromptu celebration, their confidence soaring. Actually, came a familiar, cheering voice. Hopping out of Aizawa's wrappings came the principal Nezu, surprising the class with his unexpected entrance. "This year's tests will be completely different for various reasons. They're changing things," said Yaoyorozu. "The tests now have a new focus," said Nezu, dropping down from Aizawa's shoulder. "There will be hero work, of course, but now there will be teamwork and fighting against actual people. So what does that mean for you students? You will be working together in pairs, and your opponents will be one of our esteemed UA teachers. Isn't that fabulous?" he added cheerfully. The confident atmosphere around the students plummeted like a stone off a cliff. Now it suddenly made sense to Izuku what Bruce was talking about when he said they had to adapt to fight against powerful quirks. Now they were going to test what they have learned against seasoned pro heroes. Even Izuku had to admit this was a daunting task. "Additionally, your partners and opponents have all been chosen," said Aizawa. "They were determined at my discretion, based on fighting style, grades, and interpersonal relationships." Aizawa began to read off the list of teams and teachers they were assigned to. First up would be Todoroki and Yaoyorozu, fighting against Aizawa himself, Sato and Kirishima against Cementos, Tsuyu and Takoyami against Ectoplasm, Ajiro and Ida against Power Loader, Aoyama and Uraraka against 13, Ashido and Kaminari against Principal Nezu, Koji and Gyro against Present Mike, Hagakure and Shoji against Snipe, Minta and Zero against Midnight, and lastly, "But wait," said Uraraka, suddenly realizing that the group was uneven. "What about Deku?" "Midoriya is a special exception," said Aizawa. "Among the previously mentioned factors, I have included his unique training, accomplishments, and circumstances during the selection process. Due to these unique circumstances, we have determined that it would be best for Midoriya to take his exam alone." "What?" said the class in unison. "But Mr. Aizawa, that seems very unfair," said Yaoyorozu. "I agree," said Ida. "It is true that Midoriya has achieved so much, but how can you expect him to fight against one of the teachers alone?" "What teacher would he fight anyway?" said Tsuyu, looking around. All the teachers present seemed to have been assigned a team of students already. The class fell silent as booming laughter rang out above them. A gigantic figure dropped to the ground with a loud boom, shaking the earth beneath their feet. "I am here," said All Might, his powerful form towering over everyone present. "To fight." The class was in an uproar. Izuku felt his heart sink to his feet. So this is why All Might was avoiding him lately. Aizawa had assigned Izuku to fight the symbol of peace alone. His thoughts were filled with confusion and fear as stared at All Might. Even though Izuku knew his secret, All Might was still no pushover. He wasn't sure if he could win against him in a one-on-one fight. "That's not fair," said Uraraka. "Deku won't stand a chance alone." "I concur," said Ida. "This pairing is entirely mismatched." "That's enough," said Aizawa, his eyes flashing, activating his quirk. The class fell silent. "Your classmates don't seem to have much confidence in your abilities," Midoriya, Aizawa added to Izuku. The class balked at this. "That's not true," said Kirishima. "Midoriya is the most capable out of all of us. But even still, this is All Might," said Minta. "Midoriya doesn't stand a chance." "I'll do it," said Izuku. The class all looked at Izuku with shock. Izuku didn't falter, looking from All Might to Aizawa, dead in the eyes. "Deku, are you sure?" said Uraraka, worried. "What about camp?" "I have no intention of losing," said Izuku. He turned to All Might. "I have trained at the feet of the devil himself, and have survived. I have fought against murderers, villains, and all manner of scum, and have survived. I've fought and trained and clawed my way up from the bottom of society's mop bucket to the top hero school in the nation, and have survived every obstacle, trial, and gauntlet that has been thrown at my feet." "And they have survived," He turned back to his classmates, his eyes flashing fiercely. "There is no way I'm giving up now." All Might threw back his head in bellowing laughter. This was exactly the response he was hoping for from young Midoriya. His laughs subsided and he met Midoriya's intense gaze with one of his own. "This'll be fun. Izuku versus All Might." Izuku stood in the observation room with Recovery Girl. The first exam was about to start, and Izuku didn't want to miss it. Many of the other students were off preparing themselves for the exams and strategizing with their partners. Since Izuku would be taking his exam alone, he figured his time would be best spent by observing the other exams. The practical exam was fairly straightforward. Either capture the teacher using the restraining cuffs provided to them, or escape the zone before the time runs out. The exams relied heavily on strategy, teamwork, and problem-solving abilities. Izuku would be lying if he said that he wasn't nervous. All the teachers were given heavy restraints to restrict their movements in battle, so as to level the playing field. Still, Izuku had been studying All Might his entire life, and knew what he was capable of. Even with this handicap, he knew his chances of taking down All Might in a one-on-one fight were slim. What's more, Izuku knew his biggest weakness was his injury from his fight with All for One. But he couldn't risk exploiting it without the risk of exposing All Might's secret. He figured his best bet would be to utilize his stealth skills and try to escape before the time ran out. But he had a feeling that regardless of his preparation, he would be forced into a confrontation with his former hero, and he had to be ready. "Looks like I have my work cut out for me today," said Recovery Girl. Uraraka had joined her and Izuku in the monitor room to observe the battles. The first match was starting, Kirishima and Sato against Cementos. This exam took place in a city environment, like the entrance exam and the battle training. Izuku realized that this sort of environment was brimming with cement, giving Cementos a strong advantage against the students. Sato and Kirishima appeared on the monitor before them, and they began running down the vacant street of the city. A few seconds later, they stopped short in their tracks as the pavement before them morphed into a large wall in front of them. Sato and Kirishima decided on a full frontal assault, rushing and breaking through the cement walls that formed before them. Izuku was amazed at his classmates' combined strength, knocking down wall after wall with incredible speed and power. Cementos knelt several meters in front of them. He didn't appear particularly worried, generating more cement walls as fast as they could knock them down. In the end, their chosen tactic had proved to be ineffective against their opponent, who was able to produce a seemingly endless supply of cement walls. Eventually, Sato and Kirishima hit a wall of their own, unable to keep up with the physical demands of their quirks, and were soon defeated. Next up, Takoyami and Usui against Ectoplasm, taking place inside a building environment. Ectoplasm is an intimidating pro-hero who is able to make over 30 copies of himself at a time. On top of that, he is a formidable martial artist and tactician. Izuku knew that his classmates had their work cut out for them. When the match began, however, Takoyami and Usui displayed impressive teamwork right off the bat, advancing past Ectoplasm's copies and further into the building towards the exit. Izuku was thoroughly impressed by their communication and teamwork. Soon, they reached the exit gate, and Ectoplasm was waiting for them. After defeating a few more of his copies, he demonstrated to the students the sheer immense power of his quirk by making a huge copy of himself. Takoyami and Usui were quickly swallowed by the giant copy and encased in the plasma. They were restrained, but not beaten. Takoyami threw forth Dark Shadow to fight against the real Ectoplasm, while Tsuyu utilized a rarely used aspect of her quirk. She had swallowed and regurgitated the capture cuffs to get them past Ectoplasm undetected, and then used Dark Shadow to place them on Ectoplasm. Takoyami and Usui passed with flying colors. The next two matches were as followed: Ida and Ajiro against Power Loader, and Todoroki and Yaoyorozu against Aizawa. Ida and Ajiro passed relatively quickly, with Ida using his reciproburst to launch Ajiro towards the exit gate. It was the next battle with Aizawa that Izuku was looking forward to the most. Izuku had noticed that since her loss at the sports festival, Yaoyorozu seemed to have lost a lot of her confidence. This put the team at a serious disadvantage, as she had an amazing quirk and was fiercely intelligent. Coupled with Todoroki's talent and intelligence, they promised to be an unstoppable team. Right out of the gate, Aizawa proved to be a formidable opponent. Despite the injuries he sustained during the USJ attack, he didn't appear to have lost a step. He was able to immobilize Todoroki and lay a trap to prevent him from escaping his bindings, then pursuing Yaoyorozu, who Todoroki had told to run to the exit gate. She had managed to lose Aizawa briefly and returned to Todoroki, freeing him from his restraints, before launching an attack of her own. She had been producing nesting dolls with her quirk continuously as a way to determine Aizawa's whereabouts. Inside these nesting dolls, however, were small flashbang grenades, temporarily blinding Aizawa and allowing them to escape. Once they had gotten away, Todoroki had used his ice wall to offer them some protection against Aizawa while they carried out the rest of their plan, using bindings similar to Aizawa's to entrap him. Thanks to Yaoyorozu's strategic thinking, the exam was passed and her confidence restored. Uraraka excused herself from the monitor room after this match. It was time for her and Aoyama to take their practical against 13. Izuku was looking forward to seeing Uraraka in action again since her training with Gunhead. She had asked him to spar with her on occasion, and coupled with her training against the Amazo robots, she had really improved in hand-to-hand combat. The problem with this matchup, however, was that it was difficult to get close to 13 due to his quirk. Soon, she and Aoyama were holding on for dear life as 13 threatened to suck them up with his quirk. However, in a surprising twist, Uraraka seemed to let go of the structure she was holding onto and came rushing towards 13, startling him into stopping his quirk. Uraraka used this opportunity to make use of her combat training and attach the restraining cuffs to her captor, passing the exam. Izuku had to admit for a minute he was worried, and was happy for her that they had passed. When Uraraka had returned to the monitor room, she seemed rather flustered and embarrassed about something, but quickly changed the subject when pressed about it. It was time for the 6th match, Kaminari and Ishido against Principal Nezu inside the factory setting they fought Batman in. Izuku had done a lot of research on Nezu after learning about him. Many people developed animal-like quirks that gave them the appearance and natural abilities of the animals they personified, such as with Asui and her frog quirk. However, Principal Nezu was simply the opposite of that, an animal of unknown origin who developed a quirk that made him hyper-intelligent. This afforded him the ability to develop sentience and an intellect that surpassed most men on the planet. Even Bruce admitted that it was a strong possibility that Nezu was more intelligent than both he and Lex Luthor, arguably the most intelligent people on the planet. Izuku hoped for Kaminari and Ishido to emerge victorious, but privately he wasn't sure if they stood a chance. His fears were later confirmed during the match. The principal had commandeered a tractor with a wrecking ball, and was knocking over buildings in such a way that would cause a chain reaction, causing other buildings to fall. Kaminari and Ishido had no idea that he was using the falling buildings to sequester them away from the escape gate, one step ahead of them the entire time. Eventually, time expired and they failed the exam. Koda and Gyro were up next against Present Mike. Both were at a heavy disadvantage considering Koda's soft-spoken nature and Gyro's sensitivity to sound. However, both were able to demonstrate strength of mind and strategic thinking by utilizing Koda's ability to talk to animals to communicate with bugs, making them able to crawl through the ground where Present Mike's sound waves couldn't reach them, buying them enough of a distraction to make it to the escape gate. After Koda and Gyro were Hagakure and Shoji. Their adversary, Snipe, had a unique quirk called homing that allowed him to change and control the trajectory of the bullets from his guns, allowing him superb accuracy. When the villains attacked the USJ, he was able to shoot many of them from anywhere within the facility while he stood at the entrance. This was made possible because his quirk also allowed him to sense the presence of individuals, even if they were hidden, assisting him in directing his shots to his target. Hagakure and Shoji's quirks allowed them to develop advanced skills in stealth and espionage, but Snipe's unique quirk would allow him to be able to find them easily. During the match, Snipe had used a smoke grenade in an attempt to conceal himself from Hagakure and Shoji, hoping to draw them out. However, the duo were able to adapt their plan with Shoji serving as a distraction while Hagakure placed the capture cuff on Snipe. Finally, they reached the final 2 exams, Minto and Zero against Midnight, and then Izuku against All Might. Izuku could honestly say that he was surprised at how much Minto had grown as a hero in training since the incident at the USJ. While Zero was quickly apprehended by Midnight, Minto was able to use his knowledge of their teacher's sadistic disposition to his advantage, using his sticky balls quirk to trap her to her whip, allowing time for Minto to rescue the unconscious Zero and escape the arena, passing the exam. "Alright, they did it," said Ida. "Wow, they actually had a solid plan," said Yaoyorozu. "Now your next Deku," said Uraraka. Izuku was gone. Izuku stood at the starting gate, the final exam of the day. He'd be lying if he said he wasn't nervous. He'd be lying if he said he wasn't terrified. He was about to face the #1 hero in the world, his former hero, in one-on-one combat. Even if he was hindered by the weights, and was pulling his punches, Izuku had seen what All Might could do all his life. The odds were stacked against him. He would be fighting in an urban environment. He should have plenty of places to hide, as he wanted to avoid a confrontation with All Might. He figured his best bet would be to use stealth and subterfuge to his advantage to make it to the escape gate. He would have to. Izuku's thoughts were interrupted by a huge gust of wind and debris coming straight for him. He ducked in cover just in time as it rushed over him. Had he been standing, it would have knocked him off his feet. He heard deafening crashes as the debris smashed into the buildings around him. After what seemed like an eternity, the dust and smoke began to dissipate. "Who really cares if I destroy this city?" came a bellowing voice from the billowing dust. Izuku recognized the voice as All Might, but it was different. It wasn't the haughty, laughing voice he was used to. It was coarse and intimidating. Izuku rose to his feet as the pro-hero walked through the dust into view. "If you think of this as an exam and not a real fight, you'll be sorry, young Midoriya," said All Might. He stomped his foot into the ground, causing another gust of wind and a tremor to shoot towards Izuku. "I'm a villain now, hero. Remember that. You better come at me with everything you've got. I won't hold back." Izuku swallowed. "I am so fucked," he thought glumly. Izuku threw down a smoke bomb, trying to conceal himself. All Might rushed forward with blinding speed through the smoke, grabbing Izuku squarely by the face. Izuku instinctively raised his explosive gauntlets and began launching rapid-fire attacks at All Might. The hero shielded himself from the blasts, but then slammed Izuku headfirst into the ground below, knocking the wind out of him. "Hardly worse than a sting," said All Might. Izuku recovered and threw an explosive batarang at All Might's face, who caught it effortlessly. He didn't even react as the batarang exploded in his closed fist. "That's not going to work, young Midoriya." All Might then used his extended fist and delivered a crushing blow into Izuku's solar plexus. He flew backwards at least several feet, crashing hard into the building behind him. Izuku tried to stand up, dazed. All Might had knocked him into some sort of fake office building. This was bad. Izuku realized that All Might wasn't just powerful. He is power. He tried to clear his head. He had little time to correct his strategy. He couldn't get close enough to All Might to do any real damage, and he moved too fast for Izuku to counter his attacks. He had to trap All Might somehow, just long enough for him to make it to the escape gate. But his explosives were not effective against him. He had to use something else. "Come out, little hero," Izuku heard All Might saying. "You can't hide forever." Then Izuku heard it. A faint cough. Looking out the window of the building, he saw All Might wiping blood from his mouth. "That's it," thought Izuku. "That's my window." He would have to get close to him. Much too close for comfort. Izuku braced himself. This was going to hurt. All Might was patrolling outside the building where his attack launched Midoriya. He wasn't going to bother going after him. He knew that Midoriya would either come to him or try to escape towards the gate. He only had a few minutes left in the exam, so whatever he was going to do, he had to make it quick. "Come on, hero," said All Might. I haven't got All Might started in surprise. The side of the building Midoriya was in just exploded, debris raining down on him as he shielded himself from the blast. Looking upward, he saw the form of Midoriya leaping from the building directly towards him. It seemed to All Might that Midoriya was going for the direct approach. Izuku used his explosive gauntlets and let loose a massive explosion towards his foe, forcing him to shield himself from the blast. Izuku took that moment to make his escape, running towards the exit gate. All Might coughed as the smoke around him dissipated. He noticed that Midoriya had limited the damage he did to buildings that All Might had already destroyed. He was impressed at the boy's innate sense of self-control, and how knowledgeable and creative he had become to using his explosives. But now, it was time for the teacher to take him to school. Izuku was running as fast as his legs could carry him. All Might's blast had destroyed the buildings around him, so he had nowhere to grapple to. He didn't expect his blast to stop All Might, and he knew that he would be on him any moment. "A valiant effort," said All Might, appearing suddenly beside Izuku. He quickly grabbed Izuku by his explosive gauntlets, who struggled in vain against the hero's grasp. He heard a loud crunch, pain shooting up his arms. Both his hands and his gauntlets were broken. "Without your gauntlets, you've lost your heavy attack. What will you do now, hero?" Izuku was trembling, kneeling and hanging his head. All Might began to wonder if maybe he had gone a little overboard with destroying his gauntlets and injuring his hands. But to his surprise, Midoriya began to laugh. "You may have everyone else here fooled, All Might," he said. "But I know the truth. I know your weakness." All Might instinctively reached for the scar on his side. It was still healing after the fight with the Namu. "Not that," said Izuku, looking up finally. He was wearing his mask. "It's hubris. Pure, unmitigated hubris. Easy to have when you're the toughest guy in the room. It allowed me to get close to you, and now you're mine." A large puff of smoke erupted into All Might's face. It burned his eyes and lungs, and he began coughing violently. All Might's head began to swim as he steadied himself, his vision blurring. Anesthetic gas, he heard Izuku say. Not enough to knock you out, but it'll buy me the time I need to get the hell out of here. All Might's eyes began to clear, watching Midoriya run towards the escape gate. He tried to stand, but his lungs were weakened by the gas. He coughed, wiping blood from his mouth. Not bad, kid, he said, smiling. Not bad. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 5. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.